All right. So this is entirely my fault. We are getting a late start. I left at like just the right time that I would have been here if I lived in like I don't know, uh, rural Michigan, and you could just assume that the theoretical time it takes from point A to point B is exactly how long it's going to take.
You live in pretty much what couldn't be more than like the opposite of rural Michigan.
Yes, exactly. So that is on me at this point. I really have no excuse for not remembering that. So.
Notorious LA
today?
traffic.
What's that?
I just said notorious LA traffic.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, Ethan. How are you? You go first.
I'm doing all right. Yeah, I'm doing okay.
Not much else to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
Can we get a Jordan Peterson ruling on that backdrop? Does he need to clean his room?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that joke's been made at Ethan's expense several times. I feel like when we did the debate breakdown, I feel like your sheets were all over the place, and someone was like, "Oh, he looks like he needs to clean his room."
Well, I've always had this like weird feeling about like making my bed in the morning because I'm like, it's gonna be unmade in like 10-15 hours. You know what I mean?
No, I have the same. Actually have the same approach. Like, I'm very tidy with my apartment and everything, but for some reason with my bed, and it kind of drives my girlfriend crazy. But like, yeah, I never think to make my bed because I'm like, what's the point? Fucking, it's gonna get.
Yeah.
Like, everything else is clean around my place. It's just my bed. I mean, sometimes I make it, but I don't know. And I literally don't even have any sheets. I just have like a comforter and a mattress. It'd be so easy for me to just like stretch out my comforter, but I don't. I don't know why.
Yeah, I actually do. I think psychologically, like I don't know. I feel better about myself and the world around me.
Exactly.
I've done that.
That's exactly what my girlfriend says. She's like, I feel like I can't get moving on my day if my bed is not made and it's not like there. I need to see like that it's tidy and in its proper place. Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know. Like my kind of it's kind of weird for me. I'm like very much against the idea of having just like loose trash and stuff in my room. Like if my room is messy in the sense that there's like trash in it, or like, you know, like food trash, stuff like that, it's like disgusting. Like I don't want ants coming in here, etc. But then I'll just have like books or like sheets or, you know, like things that aren't dirty just kind of like scattered about, and it doesn't really bother me.
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhat sympathetic to that. What happened? I feel like, Ethan, didn't you used to have like a peace poster above your bed or something, or is that a false memory?
No, it's not a false memory. It kind of fell apart with the years. I think I had that for like a really long time. I probably got that when I was like 12 or something.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It just kind of, deteriorated.
It deteriorated, I see. I was going to think maybe you grew out of it. It's like no longer supporting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
A symbol of peace.
I support violence and war now.
Yeah. Now he's replaced with the NATO flag.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Have the anarcho-communist flag, the NATO flag, right next to it. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. I really wish I didn't get that. Anyway, so yeah. Yeah, I think that is also I think this is etymologically correct. Bruzzone is a calzone with a pint of beer. But
that's funny. That's pretty funny. I've never heard that one before. It's a new one for me. Thank you for that.
But yeah, it's okay. So this is going to be interesting to watch. I've seen clips of it. I've seen bits and pieces of it. I have deliberately not watched the whole thing, so it'll be fresh now. I mean, it is a little bit funny because last week when Matt Christman was on, he did this whole rant, which we actually released as a clip the other day, about why this is like a sort of a silly subject to fixate on. And you know, good points were made in the course of the rant, but I'm still very curious about this debate. And I will say, like, in the first few minutes that I watched, I did feel that, you know, I mean, look, I obviously have, I'm happy to sort of do the cards on the table thing before we start about my own perspective on all this. But, I do still think, at least in the first few minutes, which I did, I think I watched like shortly after the movie, because I watched the first 10 minutes or something. And then I was like, yeah, we're going to probably surely do this as a breakdown sooner or later. I'll hold off. But I will say, I mean, in those first 10 minutes, I thought it was pretty good. I thought there were actually some pretty cogent explanations of, I mean, certainly of why to suck it up and vote for Biden, at least if you're in a swing state, but also, I mean, some of what I saw, Briahna saying in the first few minutes, I actually thought was like a pretty good articulation of certainly at least why somebody wouldn't be entirely comfortable with that, and so, this isn't, I mean, look, we're not above watching things sometimes on here where, we just think that like somebody's being completely ridiculous and you just kind of make fun of it or whatever. But like, I don't think this, I've definitely got a perspective, but, I don't think this is quite that.
Yeah, I did watch the whole thing actually. And that was actually when I messaged you about doing this as a debate breakdown. Yeah, I don't know. It's not that fresh in my memory now, but I do remember feeling really, really frustrated with one side in particular on this, who I'm sure you can guess. And I just felt like there was a surprising amount of unreasonableness. And there was even a moment where there's an admission of something that I thought was a crazy claim. But we'll see. Maybe watching it on a second time, I'll like pick up on things where it'll seem more reasonable to me than it did. And it's funny because I feel like lately I've seen like Briahna on a few debates and like kind of grown more admiration. And then I watched this debate and it's like, and then I kind of felt like I went backwards a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'll just say, cards on the table. My experience with her, I mean, I kind of was vaguely aware of her from, I mean, obviously the Bernie campaign, and she was on TMBS, never at the same time as me, but she was on there a bunch at one time. And I was in but I really started to interact with her because of Force the Vote, which she was a leading proponent of, and I thought was pretty silly, right? Like, yeah. I have my perspective on that was and is, right, that like doing a meaningless symbolic floor vote on Medicare for all, that like, even if you got it, like it just wasn't a good thing to push for, because it wouldn't do anything, and it would actually, if anything, it would like rhetorically, like it would be a little bit of a setback, just because the optics of like a 2-1 defeat with zero suspense, to the extent that anybody noticed it, I thought that would actually just make Medicare for all look like a more marginal idea, and people. Well, okay, so we'd like argued about that on back in like December 2020 on Katie Halper's show, and then she wrote something for Current Affairs about the case for Force the Vote, and I wrote something in Jacobin about why I thought it was a dumb idea, and I think it would not be an exaggeration or tendentious to say, based on her reaction, that seemed to get under her skin. There was like a bad faith episode where like the first 10 minutes were, talking about the article, and it seemed to be very irritated by it. And in fact, back in like early this year, like around January of this year, I had, she like brought that article back up, right? Because the Republican leadership fight was going on, and I don't know how well people remember that. There's like, but Kevin McCarthy, becoming the House leader, there was this whole extended drama with trying to get factions of House Republicans to support him, and he had to give them all these concessions. And Briahna, like other people who had the same perspective, were saying, hey, this proves that force the vote was a good idea because, by analogy, look at all the stuff that they're getting. And, which never really made sense to me because it wasn't like force the committee assignments, it was, it was force the vote. Right. And yeah, I still don't see what that vote would have gotten anybody or how that would have been helpful or a good thing. And anyway, but she brought up,
it's kind of funny because I think committee assignments, like when I think because when she was pushing force the vote, some progressives, including like AOC, were like, no, there are alternative asks, and like committee assignments is like one of the examples they gave of like something that would be a better, like more practical ask than like a vote on Medicare for all.
Yeah, no, right. And to be fair to her, she was somebody who, she wasn't like Jimmy Dore, who I just saw being brought up in the comments, who would be, like, stupid fucking committee assignments. That's so lame, right? Like she, not an exact quote, but the spirit is there, right? That's like, she wouldn't do that, right? She would be like, okay, cool, ask for that too, right? So that's fair enough as far as it goes, right? But like, still clearly the push, right? Like that, like she as an individual was saying that, but like the whole push was about, like, it was all structured around this demand that never made any sense to me, and especially saying, oh, you don't really care about getting everybody healthcare, if you don't want to do this thing that wouldn't have actually done anything to get everybody healthcare, and found it all really frustrating. And like I don't know, I remember that current affairs article, she'd said like, well, if people say nobody would really notice, right, that it'd be like 5 minutes on C-SPAN, it'd be nothing. But like if you combine it with a general strike, and I remember, the point I made in the Jacobin piece was like, okay, but that's like saying if you combined it with like an alien spaceship landing on top of the Capitol, like that would do something. It's like clearly, we have a country with 6% private sector unionization. You weren't going to get together a general strike within the next month for the first time in American history to coincide with this like procedural maneuver. So yeah, so we had this whole, debate about that. And when the Republican stuff came up earlier this year, like there was some article in Jacobin, and she kind of brought it up and said, like on Twitter, it's like, well, it's still better than that at Ben Burgis article, from like, 2 years ago. So that's been my, and then I should say, for full disclosure, like I ran into her like once in person since then. And we had like a much more civilized conversation about this, but like, so that's my, this is my Briahna bias, but again, and so like, look, if she says anything, I think I've cracked your code here, right? Like if she says anything unreasonable in the course of this, I wouldn't be like shocked by that. Like I wouldn't think that was unprecedented. But I do think, look, we'll obviously talk about it. But I do think that the sort of some of what she lays out in those first few minutes, I'm sympathetic to here. And, ultimately I disagree, I sort of think, I sort of think that, I am generally in favor of, closing your eyes and thinking about the National Labor Relations Board appointments if you live in a swing state. But I do, I do think that there is an on the other hand there, and that she does, and that like some of the stuff I watched, I thought she did a good job of articulating it.
Yeah. I was noticing someone in the chat earlier, kind of, we'll see there's a moment in the debate where I don't think it's quite right to characterize like Briahna as kind of like playing the victim, but like she does get really like rattled at one point by the way the other two are. And I remember when I first saw it, again, maybe on my second time, I'm going to have a different opinion, but I remember being really surprised that she was getting so rattled, because I remember that like the last few times I've seen her talk about like debating and stuff, she's described herself as being like a debate lord, loving debating, like loving every second of it. And it was just kind of interesting when I didn't actually detect that Kulinski was doing anything like especially rude in a heated debate, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch it again because that was just my initial perception. And to be honest, I did kind of have the debate on in the background when I was doing other stuff, but
Sure.
But I remember kind of being surprised because I remember when I watched her, I listened to her debate with Vosh one time, which I think she did a while ago. And I can't remember exactly what she said, but she was just like, like I should be thought of in this world of like hardcore debate bros. Like, why don't ever people think of me? Like I'm up for it. I will go and I will do any heated debate like you can ever imagine. And it was just surprising to me that like she got rattled in the middle of this debate.
That's kind of funny. Like I'm not, I mean, as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking about how I would situate myself with regard to that. Right. And like, I suppose insofar as I enjoy doing debates and I seek them out, I guess that does make me something of a debate bro, but like also, I don't know. I'm kind of very Midwestern about it. Like I sort of, I sort of think that like, it's not I sort of think that you're not actually serving the cause of like, helping persuadable people see your point or whatever by like being a raging asshole in these contexts, and that you should try to avoid doing that, I guess. Is my very lame perspective on this.
No, totally. I mean my memory, and actually Henry's kind of saying it in the chat right now, that like Kyle talked over her. And like, yeah, like normally that's kind of a bad thing, but like when a debate's getting heated, like that's very common.
I mean, there's going to be a little talking over each other. That's like that's a pretty normal thing. Like, so yeah, I don't know. Ethan, any thoughts before we get started?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I should note, like, to get my biases out there as well. It's funny, I also wrote an article back in the day criticizing Force the Vote. The major difference between me and Ben's being that, like, not many people read mine. But yeah, I mean, I was also critical of the idea. And then I guess in terms of the substance, like, I think I probably have a similar perspective as Ben in the sense that, like, yeah, I think you, like, if you live in a swing state, especially, like, you ought to vote for Biden. If not, maybe you can vote like third party or something. But if you live in a swing state, I think you ought to vote for Biden. But at the same time, I think there is something to be said about, and I didn't watch what Matt had to say about it, but I imagine he said something similar, which is it does feel kind of silly to me, the amount of attention that this gets, especially because I don't think that like reluctant leftists are like the, make or break demographic for Biden winning or losing the election. And so, and it just seems like, it does kind of strike me as strange how like eager a lot of leftists are to like criticize and chastise leftists who are hesitant to vote for Biden, as opposed to like criticizing the Biden administration. Like there is this kind of weird stance that a lot of leftists will take where it's just like hardly, like when Biden is up against Trump in the presidential elections, it's like, oh, we have to vote for Biden and then we can criticize him. And then the day after he gets elected, they're just like, you better vote for him again, than in the next 4 years.
No, totally. Like I hard sign off on every single part of that. Like I think my perspective on this for a while has been like, even in 2020, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I never even expressed an opinion about who you should vote for without doing 5 minutes of throat clearing about how like, I'm not interested in like shaming anybody for making a different calculation about this. And yeah, I agree. I mean, like, look, is it theoretically possible? Sure. Although I think that in any situation where like a lot of leftists, voting for Cornel West and swing states or whatever swung the election, or like, actually, let's put that more carefully. In any scenario where the Cornel West vote in swing states was enough that if it had all gone to Biden, Biden would have won. Biden's got so many other problems that'll be like one of like 50 reasons, right? That if you'd changed like any one of them, that he would win. And I think sort of focusing like obsessive focus on that one at the expense of the other 49, I think tends to let Biden and the Democrats off the hook. And I think it's unhelpful. I mean, I kind of agree with the Chomsky perspective about, not sort of exaggerating the importance of this particular activity as opposed to like the rest of your, your political participation. That seems very right to me. Although I think it also sort of goes both ways. Like I see a lot of voter shaming on both sides of this particular conversation, that, like people getting mad at people for, sure, people get mad at people for voting third party, but they also get mad at people for not voting for their third party, for, voting Democrat. And it all just seems a little bit beside the point to me. Because look, if you're, by the time you're in this situation where you're in the voting booth and you're either choosing between your enemies, which one of them is going to do less damage, or you're choosing to not choose between your enemies, like whatever, by the time you're in that situation, you've already lost. Like you're just trying to make the best of a bad situation. And so I don't think it's anything that anybody should fixate on. And I mean, I think there is a point that's like, okay, look, obviously the three of us are part of the problem right now because we're about to watch this, but like, probably 14 months before anybody votes at all. This is like a weird thing to focus on, but whatever, we do debate breakdown. This is a big, interesting debate. We're going to break it down. So yeah, I'm with you very much on all of that stuff. I mean, I think that I'm never going to like scold somebody for third party voting, even, I mean, like whatever I'm going to do. My plan, next fall, unless something dramatic changes. And then, for some reason I'm, living in,
back in Michigan,
maybe. Right. But like, unless my plan is that I'm going to vote for Cornel West because I'm in California. Why not? Right. But I'm never going to scold somebody for voting for Cornel West in a swing state because, one, I don't really think that does a lot of good. And two, it's, I mean, I think it's just kind of a bad theory of the case. I think a lot of people who do that, like, we're never really going to vote for Democrats anyway. And it's also just, I don't know. I think that's like not helpful and it's not my role. And frankly, there was a point where there was a point in my life when I was pretty hardcore on the Briahna side of this argument. So the memory of how little swayed I was by any of that stuff when it was directed at me is vivid enough that, I'm not gonna start doing it now too. But, you could have a tactical discussion about like, who do you, like, okay, like without like sort of without doing it in that like scolding way, just like if somebody wants to talk about it, it's like, okay, tactically, what makes sense? Do you want to have a, Democratic president who will be in many respects a mediocre neoliberal, but will also do things like appoint better people to the NLRB, et cetera? Or do you want the festival of union busting and deregulation and tax cuts for rich people and ultra conservative appointees to the Supreme Court that you got under Trump last time? I think that's a pretty easy question. That's my perspective. But I'm sorry, Victor, I cut you off. You're going to say.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I mean, obviously I'm in Canada, so it doesn't affect me as directly. But I was also going to say that, like, to me, I just feel like the Trump thing is the thing that I feel like makes it like a more urgent, like if you're living in a swing state, like that to me, I just feel like in the past, maybe if you wanted to make those sorts of arguments when it was just like a more milquetoast Republican, I don't know. But to me, I feel like if I was living there, I would feel more like a special urgency to just like make sure he doesn't win again. But I don't know. I just the thought of him winning now that he's possibly going to go to prison and like that makes my stomach like feel sick, like how complicated, how messy that's going to be. I just feel like I would want to avoid that.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, I will say when he was president before, in most ways, not every way, but in most ways he did govern like a, quote unquote normal Republican, which is, but like also like, I don't know. I think normal Republicans are pretty bad. Like
no, they are, especially these days. I just think that it's not so much the policy perspective as much as like the continued erosion of like trust in institutions that I think is like a bigger worry, and the way that he can kind of pour gasoline on that even more.
Gotcha.
At the same time, though, like, I don't know, like throughout, historically, I've thought like, like I would think like, okay, the Democrat's probably better. You should probably vote for the Democrat. So I'd kind of like passively think like, yeah, I hope the Democrat wins. But I don't know. With Trump, there is a part where I'm like, yeah, I hope the Democrat wins. But then I'm like, but it would be really funny, like there would be a lot of entertainment value if it went the other way. That's all
I mean,
I'll say.
things are going to get crazy, and to anticipate a point that comes up in the debate, if you have accelerationist tendencies, then maybe that's exciting to you. But I personally don't know how sympathetic I am to that.
Yeah, I think accelerationism is, not right. That I think the evidence would suggest, after Trump was president for 3 years, there was a Democratic primary where the most milquetoast Democrat won because after 3 years of Trump, people were just desperate to go back to normal, and Biden seemed almost reassuringly normal, and people believed, I think falsely, honestly, I think Biden would have, if he'd had, if COVID hadn't fallen into his lap, right, and Trump's mismanagement of COVID and the riots and all that stuff, I think Biden totally would have lost in 2020. But people mistakenly thought he was the best bet for beating Trump and etc. So that example, man, that is not good evidence for the accelerationist thesis, right? That's aren't we supposed to turn to the radical left, once the scary right winger has been in office for a few years? It's I don't know. That doesn't, at least in my it's a very small sample size, but at least in my adult life, it's never worked out that way. I mean, when Bush, Bush had been in office for a term, Democrats nominated John Kerry as the nominee. It's not I don't know when this, if anything, I actually think there might be a better case that the actual left, people to the left of liberalism, sort of have a better shot under conditions where you can't blame everything on some crazy Republican being in charge. Yeah. That it's there must be some deeper problem here.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, that's going to come up in the debate too. So I'm the actual accelerationist part, which should be interesting. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat have really strong opinions, so I'm excited to see how this goes.
Yeah. This is, I think that was
going to be
more or
heated.
less inevitable given the topic. Yeah. Yes, Sly Tendencies 87. Thank you for the super chat. Says BJG and Jimmy Dore helping Trump. They downplayed everything he did and said. He never overturned Roe v. Wade and appoint more SCOTUS judges. To be fair, I don't actually know if Briahna said that. I know Jimmy did. He famously said in his 2016 debate with Sam Cedar that the moon would fall into Lake Michigan before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. So I don't know. If he's done any soul searching on that since, I have my guesses. But in any case,
he seems like the reflective type.
Yes, exactly. Big on reflection. Probably, neurotically self-doubting. It's like a early Woody Allen character. All right.
We should start because I like the half nerd in there. He's 20 minutes. He's I just had a 20-minute conversation and I came back. You haven't started the debate yet. And then Sec Trastien or whatever. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. He's they're preparing to prepare.
Yeah. Secret Asian Dan, I believe.
Oh yeah. Oh shit. I totally fucking misread that. That was wrong with my brain. All right.
Yeah. So that's possible. The moon has been replaced with another one. Can't rule it out. All right. Let's watch.
Welcome, everybody, to a special edition, I'd say, of Krystal Kyle and Friends. Not only is it Krystal Kyle and Friends, it's also sort of like a dual thing going on. We got Briahna Joy Gray in the house, and this will be on her channel as well, the Bad Faith Podcast.
Little crossover episode.
Love that for us. Definitely. Looking forward to it. So we're going to discuss Cornel West's campaign and everything around that. And I just want everybody in the audience to know, because I don't know if we've said this publicly before, that he's been invited on multiple times and he just hasn't come on yet. And, this goes all the way back to when he launched.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We invited him on. He hasn't come on yet. Will he eventually? I don't know. It's up to him. Ball's in his court.
And we had him on before.
Before he announced his campaign. I mean, we're going back to when the People's Party thing launched, we invited him on all the way back then too, and just haven't heard back or anything. But I just don't want people to think we're debating Cornel West, but like Krystal and Kyle are refusing to talk to Cornel West. We'd love to talk to Cornel West. We want to have him, we'd love to have him on at any point in time to discuss anything and everything. So we're going to discuss his campaign a little bit here. And so I want to lay out what my position is, and then Bri, I'll turn it over to you and you can respond to it. And Krystal, you can jump in at some point and say what your position is.
We'll go through all the things.
We'll go through all the things. So here's first of all, in the Democratic primary, because I'm a registered Democrat in New York, I will be voting for Marianne Williamson. Very happy and proud to say that. I'm the chief Marianne Williamson bro out there. I'm leading the charge. Now, in New York, I'm in a safe state. So would I vote for Cornel West in New York? Yes, because I have a 95% agreement with him on policy. And I think it would be nice to get the Green Party in a position where if they become more viable because we get ranked choice voting or something, it'd be nice to grow their popularity a little bit. And when we get ranked choice voting, I think they kind of automatically become a lot more viable. So I'd like to help out in that process. But if I'm in a swing state and it's Biden versus Trump, I'm at the point now where I don't even think it's a tough call. I would definitely vote for Biden, because either in that situation, even if other people are running, either the Democrat or the Republican is going to win. And in my estimation, Biden has definitely passed what I would describe as my bare minimum purity test. And I think if it's him or Trump, or even him or DeSantis or anybody, he just blows them out of the water. And so I think I'd happily vote for Biden in that instance. Your response?
So I similarly was voting for Jill Stein in New York in 2016.
I did the same.
And I also happen to believe that strategically it makes the most sense to apply pressure to the Democratic Party by voting for not Biden in a primary. Marianne Williamson is obviously the most progressive candidate in the primary, and then vote for Cornel West in the general. And I know there are a lot of people in my audience who are frustrated by that plan because they think that it takes something away from Cornel West's run, or it affirms the Democratic Party in some way to vote for Marianne Williamson running as a Democrat. I don't feel that way. I feel it's a little hypocritical to have that position, given that we all just enthusiastically voted for Bernie twice in the primary the last 2 rounds. You can make a distinction saying that Bernie was an independent and he always identified as an independent, and Marianne Williamson doesn't have that kind of cloak of distance from the Democratic Party. You can say what you want. I don't see those things as mutually exclusive in the least. So that is also my plan. I differ from you only insofar as that I would say it's a more difficult choice in a swing state to decide what you're going to do. But I frankly respect people who feel comfortable. It has not been something that I have to contend with, but I respect people who feel comfortable voting third party even in swing states. And the reason is this, and
just real quick note here. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but from everything I've ever seen her say about this, and I don't know, like YouTube, Twitter, whatever, really seems like she's understating her position there, right? It's not just that she respects people who do that. I think it's that she advocates that. Is that wrong?
It's interesting. I think she kind of waffles on that a little bit because it's like at times she rhetorically does say kind of what she's saying now, but more strongly, where she's just like, I don't want to shame people. Like, I totally understand why they would want to do that. Sure. But then at other times she does seem to be kind of advocating for it. So it's actually not always clear to me what her position actually is.
Yeah, I really could have sworn in her debate with like Noam Chomsky, she was at least arguing that like for a bunch of strategic reasons, like you ought to not vote for Joe Biden.
Yeah, no, for sure. I remember that one very well. And yeah, I really, that really seemed to be the position that if you say that people should vote for Biden, then you're like, there was like a very specific, there was like a racial justice kind of argument being made in that case that, you're just like, well, what about, and I don't know how much this was just kind of her trying to turn around the usual use of this kind of language, and how much this was just her position, but it was like, oh, well, you don't care about like what Black people are going through if you don't, if you don't want to, if you want people to, wait for another 4 years or whatever, you're not willing to say, that you shouldn't vote for them. So anyway, I just, whatever, I guess we can see as it goes on, but I just want to note that because it's like, because yeah, look, if her position is just that you shouldn't shame people or that you would understand why at, or maybe even that you'd respect it, it's like, sure, fine, right? Like that's, we could all agree on that and go home, right? But like if the position is that this is what you should do, or that it makes more sense to do this than not to do it, or even that it makes equally as much sense to do it or not to do it, like then that does seem wrong to me. And there's, then we could have an interesting debate.
It's also like an important distinction to make, I think, where it's like you can do, like someone can do something that's like morally wrong and it can still be a bad thing to like shame them for it. Like it can still be unproductive to shame somebody for doing something, even though that the thing is something they ought not to have done,
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's right. No, I think that's definitely going to be true in some cases, that there are things that you should, that they're like, that you shouldn't do, but it's nevertheless sort of unproductive or unfair or, excessive or whatever to shame people for doing. And certainly in a case like this, I'd say it's like, okay, well, whether or not you want to sort of put it in those terms, like, I think there are definitely like good reasons to do this, right? But there might just be like reasons of like what you want to focus on or how you want to relate to people, whether you want to sort of be moralistically shaking your finger at them or, like have a different kind of conversation, why, not to shame them for doing so. So yeah, it's a little, we'll see as it goes on, but my strong suspicion is that her actual position is going to go like way beyond that.
Goes back to that early bad faith viral Noam Chomsky interview, in which I asked him about a month before the 2020 race. Look, I said, I take your point. Let's say Trump is an existential threat. Let's say that he's a unique threat among all Republican candidates. My concern is that every year, because we all vote for blue no matter who, because most Democrats vote blue no matter who, or most left-leaning people do, the message that gets sent out is that Democrats don't have a bar. You can go as low as you want, as close to the Democratic Party as you, Republican Party as you want, and there's a ratchet to the right effect. And Republicans know that they can keep being more and more extreme. And so I want you to explain to me what you predict to be the stopping point at which we're no longer saying this new Republican is the worst that has ever happened. This new Republican is the worst that has ever happened. Tell me you're not going to be saying the same thing about Ron DeSantis or Vivek Ramaswamy or whatever other person comes down the pike. And he was unable, in my subjective view, to respond credibly to that claim. So if somebody could tell me strategically what the stopping point is going to be of making this argument of the lesser of two evils, I would be open to the idea that, okay, this is the last one. Donald Trump, fine. He tried to steal the election, fine. That is a new line that he has crossed. But absent an acknowledgement that we are creating our own destiny by lowering the bar in these ways, I'm not comfortable coming out and criticizing anybody who no longer wants to be complicit in that kind of a system that's enabled the Democratic Party to not have a primary, treat Marianne Williamson as badly as they've treated her, treat Bernie Sanders as badly as they treated him, and openly come out and say they don't have to hold a free, fair election. The DNC argued that in court.
So let me explain a little bit of my position. I think that'll help respond to some of what you said there. And I'm also curious to dig in a little bit more to your analysis of how the Biden administration has actually been in reality. So last election in 2020, I did live in a swing state. I lived in Virginia, still live in Virginia, registered in Virginia. And it did not feel good to vote for Joe Biden, but I decided to vote for Joe Biden, which is something I said publicly at the time. But I said something very similar to you, which is like, listen, this was not easy for me. If you, wherever you live, swing state, not swing state, et cetera, you do whatever you analyze is the right thing to do. And the reason that I voted for him primarily at that time, even though I thought he had an atrocious record in the Senate, even though, complicit in the Iraq War, complicit in bad trade deals, complicit, like terrible things on crime, all that stuff, right? The primary reason I voted for him was because of the National Labor Relations Board. And because labor politics and building out union power in this country, to me, is one of the most important goals and something that I think we all share and leftists generally believe. Now, in retrospect, not only do I feel good about that vote, he's actually surprised me. Now, I've got all kinds of issues, right? On the National Labor Relations Board, though, specifically, they just issued a ruling which could be a complete game changer for unions. And just to explain to people a little bit, Basically, in the past, bosses could union bust with impunity, no accountability. Now, the process going forward is completely changed. If bosses are caught union busting, then that's it. There's no more election. It's canceled. They have to recognize the union and start bargaining with them. That's the biggest shift in labor relations we've had in our lifetime. So that's why at this point, I'm not only, it's likely to, I'm a Marianne supporter as well, but we can all see the most likely outcome is it's going to be Trump versus Biden. Not only would I say that protecting the Biden National Labor Relations Board isn't important enough for me to vote for Joe Biden, but it is important enough that I would actively encourage, but I'm not going to shame them for whatever they decide to do, but I would actively encourage people who are in a swing state to vote for Joe Biden, if for no other reason than to protect that board.
So I think that's a perfectly defensible position. And I had this conversation on my podcast in the last episode, and there were people who would characterize that position as, I mean, you've heard the thing, you've been on the internet, being too credulous about Biden, or, being too comfortable in one's own position in life and not needing enough change and being happy with the status quo. People will say things like that. I think actually that if your priority, if you believe the path to meaningful change is going to primarily come through a kind of, I don't say this dismissively, but a kind of labor incrementalism, meaning there are meaningful labor gains that happen, but are not the type of which would radically transform the system the way that some people want to happen in a shorter term. And the way that some people might argue Bernie Sanders represented his movement as the goal of being, then that's a defensible position. But I have to hold space for the reality that there are people for whom, even as significant as those labor gains are, it's simply insufficient. And what they see when they look at the trajectory of the last 50, 60 years of Democratic Party politics, when they read Listen Liberal and see the longer game, the Democratic Party making a concerted choice to back away from labor in a way that has gone on for decades and isn't necessarily turning around as a consequence of Joe Biden having some good NLRB appointments.
So let me actually,
and then I want to jump into it.
So number one, I don't think that in massively increasing union density, I actually don't see that as incremental change. I mean, if you look at the chart of the decline in the middle class and the decline of union density, you'd be hard pressed to find a more significant factor.
I made these arguments as well.
But the other piece is, I feel like those same people who are right about the Democratic Party, they were right about the analysis in Listen Liberal, right about the fact that you had, this free trade bipartisan consensus, and in large part a union busting bipartisan consensus, also don't acknowledge that there actually has been a notable shift in the Biden administration. Now, my big issue with the Biden administration, I mean, there's a million of them, right? On foreign policy, I've got problems. But my biggest issue economically with the Biden administration is the way they've allowed the pandemic relief, the short-term pandemic relief programs to fall away and leave a lot of ordinary Americans in a more precarious financial position now than they were at the beginning of the administration. And that's not nothing. But when I look at the long term, when I look at the fact that, listen, with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the CHIPS Act, with infrastructure investment, you're talking about industrial policy in a way that would have been completely unheard of in the Clinton-Obama era. When you look at not just the NLRB, which I said is the core for me, but also his antitrust appointments and the fact they're really trying to reverse decades of neoliberal attack on any sort of trust busting, I feel like none of those improvements that have made Biden on that front way better than Obama, way better than Clinton, I just feel like there's no willingness to acknowledge any of that whatsoever.
I don't think the issue is acknowledging it. It's how much it matters to you, how weighty that is to you, and how much you see those kinds of call them meaningful improvements as really core to the nature of the project that you're on. And I think that what some people are frustrated by is that this went from feeling like, in both left media and left politics, a bigger revolutionary project that was going to the core of our capitalist system and wanting to radically change the way that human lives are valued, what we consider to be the nature of our social safety net, what we believe to be the nature of what we consider to be human rights. And they wanted to join a movement that validated what many of us felt intrinsically, emotionally for most of our lives, that something in the milk very much wasn't clean. And Bernie came along and articulated that it was legitimate for us to be asking for something more.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this point, it does feel as though there has been a kind of a bait and switch. It's not that what you're describing isn't true or legitimate. And I said this on my podcast. If your priorities are what you have kind of articulated your priorities as being, I think it's a perfectly legitimate argument. But I have to hold space for the fact that for many people, it simply is inadequate.
Wait, can I respond?
Yeah. So I've been trying to, obviously don't want to pause this too often, but this actually seems like a reasonable increment since the last time we stopped. And
Agree.
There's a lot that we like since the last time we stopped. I've been tempted to stop like 5 times. So
Same.
I obviously have stuff to say, but I want to start with you guys.
I don't know, Ethan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I guess there were like a few things. I don't know, like it's just kind of it's interesting because there's this argument where she's like, oh, well, it seems like the major strategic consideration for her is basically, well, if we keep just voting for Briahna.
Yeah.
It's like if you keep voting for Democrats, then Democrats are just going to think, oh, we can throw out whoever and the lefties are still going to vote for us. And so they're going to want to pander to the left less. And it's like, I mean, maybe that's like a plausible thing that could happen. It's also plausible that Democrats see that like lefties aren't voting for them and they say, oh, looks like we've lost this demographic. We can't satisfy these people. So let's chase after different demographics. I don't know. Let's go after people who are on the right side, more of the right side of the Democratic Party or something like that. I'm not saying that's more likely, but it's just like, this seems like one of those cases where it's like there's kind of plausible mechanistic speculation in like both directions. I'm not aware of any like super convincing like empirics on like which side is right.
And again, like I mean, in a certain sense, I just don't think you're going to get one because there have been. So let me think about this. So So Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden. So Biden is the 46th president of the United States, right? That's right.
Yeah.
So, okay. So if you think about that, the total number of presidential elections that have ever happened in American history is basically a statistically worthless sample size. There just aren't enough of them. But this is not going to be statistically rigorous because we just don't have the right numbers to do statistically rigorous. But if you're going to like read the tea leaves as best you can from like sort of recent and relevant examples, I mean, to your point, Ethan, certainly in my life, it's actually worked out kind of the opposite of the way that this theory would say. Like in 2000, Ralph Nader got 3 million votes. That's by far the biggest left-wing third-party vote total in the last, I don't know, several decades, certainly. Like I think you have to go back like pretty far into the 20th century to find anything more than that. So it was this huge thing. It was 3% of the vote. And certainly, famously, he got more than, the difference, the difference between Gore and Bush. I actually think in a couple states, but most famously in Florida. And it's complicated because I think there are good reasons to think that a fair vote count, that Gore would have won anyway in Florida. But regardless of what you believe about that, certainly what every liberal believed after the 2000 election was that it was Nader's fault that Gore had lost. And did they conclude from this, man, we better nominate somebody who like the lefties are really going to like in 2004? No, they've nominated John Kerry, who like voted for the war in Iraq and the Patriot Act and No Child Left Behind and like basically every major Bush initiative. And, he was just awful. So it just like empirically, it seems like, again, at least anecdotally, like it just has not worked out that way. And, it's really hard to see why it would. I would also question what the goal is, right? Like, do you see your long-term goal as pressuring centrist Democrats to be better versions of themselves, or do you think you're doing something different? But what were you saying, Victor?
Well, I was just going to say, like, it also just seems plausible that the opposite is true. That, like, if you do, like, because there's this assumption that if people did, like, I think sometimes there can be a little bit of, I think, diluted fantasy on the left that, the vast majority of Americans like secretly have all these left-wing views, and like if you put up a left-wing candidate, like they're going to win. And I just don't think that polling or like bears that out. Like, I know that Biden won a lot of people who he probably would have lost, or at least I remember reading something that sounded persuasive. Maybe one of you will correct me, that there's a lot of like middle America women who were like conservative leaning but really hated Trump. And it's like, okay, you put up someone who's like ultra left. I just think, again, I would say that like on both sides, it's hard to tell what the truth is, but I guess it just seems just as reasonable to me that you also put up a more left-wing candidate, you're going to scare away a lot of voters. Like, it's at least just not obvious to me that. I mean, I think it depends what.
Yeah. There is like a left-wing. I think it depends what kind of left-wing candidate and like what the messaging is. Like, I think with like Bernie Sanders, I think there was a fair amount of polling evidence that he did have a fair amount of crossover appeal with even some Republican voters, etc. Certainly, there are issues where you have like majorities of Americans for like certain kinds of social democratic policies, like like there's a majority for Medicare for all and an even bigger majority for public option. So there's stuff to work with there, right? I mean, like that but like also, that doesn't mean that most Americans are like straight down the line left wing in all of their views, obviously. So like different candidates could appeal to them for different reasons. And also, like, I will say, oftentimes we tell ourselves this story on the left. I think this might be part of your point, that there's some huge mass of non-voters who like agree with us much more than the people who actually are voting.
Exactly. And
that, I think there's not a lot of good evidence for. Like, if you really do like a cold-eyed look at the polling evidence, I don't know that there's like a lot of backup for that like this idea that there are all these people who are like, basically like who just like sort of instinctively have all the same views as like, Jacobin readers, but like just aren't engaged enough to vote.
That's exactly where I was going. And I think, I think when having these conversations, I'm just noticing some of the comments in the chat too, like it can be really easy to sort of slip into mistaking kind of like an empirical claim with like a normative claim. Like,
right. Yep.
Would I like Bernie Sanders or someone more left to win? Like, of course that's what I would want. But the conversation about like what seems to be the empirical reality of most voters' minds and the institutions of the United States, how they work, that's a separate conversation, right? So like, and I think that if you cross your wires too much and kind of like conflate the two, then like I just think that can hurt your chances of actually like getting meaning like closer to where you want to get.
Yeah, I mean, look, to use a phrase that I used, I think 700,000 times between November 2016 and November 2020, Bernie would have won. I do think that, right? But like,
I do too, actually.
But also part of the case for that is that he had he was so relentlessly disciplined about message, and the stuff he emphasized were the aspects of a left program that were most popular. And even though, he would take like conventionally socially liberal positions on everything else, he didn't, he didn't, it was like obvious that he didn't live and breathe culture war. And I think that he had it, I think that there was an opportunity there for him to get people who might have disagreed with him about some of those issues to like come over and vote for him anyway. So that's kind of the case. So I think that's all compatible with what you're saying. I mean, I guess the two big points I wanted to make before we start back up again are, one, when Briahna says, what's the guarantee that this won't be the last time, that you won't say this again in 4 years or 8 years? I don't really understand that question, because it's like, well, I mean, if you're in the same situation in 4 years or 8 years, you should say that. That like, yeah, what, like, why is this like a one-time only thing, right? Like, yeah, that's you should just generally say that, right? Like, I think, again, I mean, the sort of model that I've always liked for thinking about this is like the way that, in France, they have those 2-stage elections where the top 2 vote getters, go on to the second round. And, sometimes it'll be like 2 right-wing candidates who make it to the second round. It'll be like the conservative and like the quasi-fascist. And, socialists and communists in France will just kind of, as a matter of course, they'll vote for like the conservative in the second round to stop the National Front. And you could say, oh, well, how many times are you going to do that? I mean, presumably, however many times it ends up in that situation, that like, like until such time as you can get like a leftist in the second round of the election, so that doesn't, that situation doesn't come up. So, I mean, it seems like, well, yeah, if you've lost and you're in this situation where you're just, the question before you is how are you going to make the best of put together the pieces that you still have control over to make the best of a bad situation, then yeah, you should just do that. But like, the point is to not be in that situation in the first place, to win. And it doesn't really seem like there's anything you could do in the ballot box when you're in this position where you're trying to decide whether to cast a lesser evil vote or a symbolic protest vote. It's like, no, there's nothing you could do with that's going to like somehow make it such that situation won't arise again in the future, right? Like, you've already, by the time you're in that situation, the opportunity to make that not arise in the future has already passed. The ship has sailed. You lost, right? So what you need to do is win next time. And, in this case, I think it's, I think the American left is in pretty bad shape, it's more than just, we're probably unfortunately talking about a longer time scale than like next time, but yeah,
Definitely.
You want to win at some point in the future. And that takes me to the second point, which is actually the biggest one to me, which is that, Krystal, I think, is correctly emphasizing the labor point. And, I think Briahna's dismissal of that, the labor incrementalism, I think
I wanted to ask about this, so I'm glad you're bringing it up.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the most telling thing here, because I think it's the thing where I think I have the biggest sort of strategic disagreement with her. That, because it's not just like, if the way you're thinking about this is, well, okay, if you have better NLRB rulings and more unions, then that'll be, then like some good things will happen, people make some extra money, whatever, but not as good, she said at the end there, right, as like what Bernie was promising, for example. And okay, on one level that's true, and in fact that part of it where she says was, when I watched this first part the first time, was the part that I actually thought, okay, you know what, she actually did a good job there of articulating something important. That thing about how that sense that the milk was spoiled, that there was something fundamentally wrong, that we needed fundamental change. Like, I think that was all reasonably well stated, and that's important. But I think that if you're thinking about that way, right, with that contrast, it's like, oh, well, some good things will happen because of more unionization, but like not like fundamental good things like what we really need. I think that's wrong, for like really basically fundamentally wrong, for at least 2 reasons. One is, look, if Bernie had been elected president, it's not like he would have just magically been able to implement his whole program, right? Like, that's a little bit of a separate issue, actually, right? Like, you can, like, you elect somebody president, it's like they'll be able to do lots of good things through like executive action or whatever, but like the sort of biggest social democratic reforms Bernie was talking about certainly aren't things you could do unilaterally, right? I mean, what that does is it basically gives you the bully pulpit to fight for those things, but like it's not like they would have automatically happened. And in fact, there would have been tremendous resistance from capital to all of those things, right? Like, I mean, that's because, I mean, like, I don't know, healthcare is actually like a pretty big percentage of the American economy. It's a minority, obviously, but it's like a pretty big percentage. And if you want to essentially nationalize the payer for that whole percentage, that's going to be a huge fight, and there's going to be like massive resistance to that from corporate America. And you're only gonna prevail if you have some pretty serious countervailing source of power to use to break that resistance. Well, what would that be? I mean, if not for organized labor, right? Like, as like not just that, but like that's kind of the biggest chunk of it. And for that matter, why did Bernie lose in the first place? Like, people people want to say like, oh, it was stolen, and I get what they mean. And I think when you say that about 2016, it's a little bit more true when you say it than when you say it about 2020. When you say it about 2020, it's like, well, okay, so the centrist convinced some centrist candidates to drop out to make sure that another centrist won. That's not really stealing anything, right? That's just sort of being tactically smart. I mean, I wish Elizabeth Warren had dropped out and endorsed Bernie. But like, the biggest reason is it just reflected the fact that the left is extremely weak on the ground, right? I mean, if anything, it's amazing that Bernie got as close as he did, considering the actual comparative weakness structurally of the American left. And what would a stronger version of the American left be based on? Well, some kind of grassroots organization that would make people much more politically active because, they were thinking about these questions and they were acting collectively, like organized labor, right? Like, so it seems like you both would have probably needed a stronger labor movement to just or at least with a stronger labor movement existing and more of it more of it leaning our way and whatever, like, you would have had a much better chance of Bernie being the candidate in the first place. You would have needed a pretty strong organized working class in order for there to be any chance that he was going to get through his biggest policy initiatives once he was president. And then like the last thing is just like, I just think, I mean, look, I don't want to sound like too much of a sort of dully predictable kind of, dogmatic Marxist here, but like, you're just not going to get fundamental changes in American society of any kind without an organized working class. Like, there is no alternate way to do it, right? Like, there's no other social force that could accomplish that. So when you say like a labor incrementalism, I mean, that makes it sound like what you think the point of the labor stuff is that, well, this is just like one more mechanism we could use to make people's lives a little bit better. And it's like, I think that that's just fundamentally misguided. That no, this is kind of the whole thing. And so somebody, having like a mediocre Democrat who obviously it's still like, Biden, Biden is still Biden, he's still like definitely not on our side in a larger sense. Like the Railway Labor Act invocation last year definitely showed that. But somebody who just, because of the different, relationships that the parties have structurally to labor unions, like, look, Obama sucked, but his NLRB was way better than Trump's. And I think, for all sorts of reasons, I think Biden's is better than Obama's had been. And so at the very least, if you want to protect what little organization the American working class currently has, then like just not having hardcore union busters as the referees is actually really important. And, some of this stuff, like, I mean, yeah, I guess you could say on one level what's happening with, these improvements for the labor rules or whatever, in some sense are incremental, but I just don't, I think it's like the most important thing in the long term. We're not going to change, if you want to fundamentally realign American politics in the way that you need to even achieve social democracy in this country, you're just not going to get there through, like people making, different decisions in the voting booth in, November 2024 that like, you're not going to get there. Like, I love Cornel West. You're not going to get there through like a bigger Cornel West vote total, right? You're going to get there through having an organized working class. And like, I think that's the point that she's missing on the most basic level.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a shitty situation, but I think like but this is what I feel like realistically confronted with in terms of options. And yeah, I mean, we should keep watching, but
yeah, of course,
but just quickly, I think like not knowing how much of an impact the Labor Relations Board made. So I'm glad that you kind of gave that overview of the impact. I just think in general, my reaction when I originally watched this is just feeling like the kind of dismissal of the significance of these like changes as just being like, oh, it's just like a small thing. It's just incrementalism. Like, I don't know. That always irritates me because I always think about the people who like are concretely their lives are impacted by that. And it's like, and I'm just like, it just feels like, no, but like my big political dream needs to come before like your life being better or something like, or at least like not weighing it properly. Just being like, well, we need to get the percentage of Cornel West vote to like 5%. So maybe we can somehow in the long run push for like, I don't know, like ranked ballots. And then it's like, but then in the meantime, we're going to have this like criminal, I don't know. It's just not even close to me.
I mean, look, people do whether there is a union in your workplace obviously makes like a huge tangible difference to your life. That's just true. But so I definitely hear you on that. But I even think on the long-term point, it's like, no, I mean, long-term, this is the most important, thing, right? Like, cause it's not like whether you, I just don't believe that like, whether you have like the Green Party is completely marginal or almost completely marginal is just going to be as important, as whether workers have some kind of, collective voice and organization in terms of reshaping American politics. So anyway, but yes, we've stopped for way too long because I got ranty when we started on that. This is on me. So let's watch a bunch more.
Yeah,
let me jump in here. So my issue is that many people on the left are, I would say, dishonestly refusing to acknowledge any good things that were done. We could all on the left list, like, here's the 57 things we hate that Biden did. But when something good happens, I'm the only one talking about it. And then I get accused of being a DNC shill. Now, I'm not like, look, I'm not blind. I think in order to be intellectually honest, you have to look at, here's the good things that happen. Here's the bad thing that happened. I'm going to give them all to you. And then you could judge how much you value each and which one you weigh more and how that factors into your like voting analysis. But I was like the poster boy back in the day, or people viewed me this way, as like, he's the purity tester. He's like the main purity tester guy. And I didn't vote for Biden in 2020 because I didn't think he would pass my purity test. Now, at the time, people could go back and watch the video. My purity test was super fucking lenient. It was like, if I'm convinced you're going to do like 2 or 3 of the things that I value highly, then I would vote for you. Because I know it's basically down to just the Democrat and the Republican, no matter how much we want to wish the Green Party or Libertarians want to wish the Libertarian Party into existence. And so when I look at the record, again, I can list all the bad things, but you just mentioned the NLRB raising overtime pay, or you mentioned the thing where, they automatically recognize the union if the bosses try to bust it up. There's also the overtime pay rule where now it's not $33,000, it's about $55,000 a year, where now you get overtime pay. That's a huge, huge change. Student loan debt reduction, and even Biden coming back after the Supreme Court tried to slap it down, and he said, no, I'm going to try to do it through the Higher Education Act now. There's little things we could go after him. Oh, the interest rate. Yes, that's bad. I agree with you on that. But we got to recognize that that is, all things considered, a step in the right direction. Pulling out of Afghanistan, he actually had the balls to do it, even when the media was shitting on him relentlessly. And I didn't see anybody on the left coming into his defense at that point.
I saw a lot of people.
I was like the only fucking one. It was like me and Matt Christman.
I definitely defended him.
Okay, well, then it's like 3 people. I didn't, and all these, oh, I'm so anti-war. He pulls out of Afghanistan, and it gets messy because that's what happens when you pull out of wars. And all of a sudden, oh my God, it's
I thought that was actually a good moment for the left. I saw a lot of consensus. Good on you, because we almost resented and kind of were enjoying the extent to which he was getting, dogpiled by the mainstream media, and we were the only ones defending him. So I would quibble with that a little bit. But
I didn't see much defending him. I really didn't.
Kyle, what people are responding to, if I can offer this, is not the idea that you are accurately describing advancements, good things that Joe Biden is doing. I think you could also say Obama did some good things.
No, Biden is way better than Obama, not even close.
That's not the point I'm making. Okay. It's not that one is better than the other. You could also sit here and say Obama did good things. Now, the way you bristled at me saying that, I could say, oh, why won't you just acknowledge that Obama did good things? The same way that you're saying that leftists won't acknowledge, they bristle when you acknowledge that Biden did good things. And it's because we have different standards and we're making different kinds of comparisons.
But that's not my issue, because they're not even acknowledging the good things is my point. I have a list of 47 things here, and I've heard nobody talk about any of them.
But let me get to the core of this point. The reason that people are frustrated with that kind of analysis is because it's been used for so long by liberals to justify why people shouldn't be asking for more. I'm not saying that that's what you're doing. But if you bring up something like student debt, when the consensus of all of the student debt experts that I've talked to on my podcast, people from the Debt Collective, the Asher Taylors of the world, the legal experts I've brought on, is that there was a path toward doing this, to canceling all student debt that would not have been stymied by the Supreme Court. The same authority that Donald Trump used to enact the student debt moratorium, which has been ongoing until beginning of this month for the last 3 years, was the same authority that he could have canceled all student debt with a stroke of a pen. He chose not to do that because he decided to means test the program. He circulated those documents. I got one in my inbox last August, I believe it was, to see if you qualify for student debt. It was a very easy form. But when he did that, that started the clock for people to be able to challenge it in court, which what 6 states did, 2 of them were successful, and now here we are today. Not only did he decline to do the unstoppable mechanism to actually cancel all student debt, he additionally chose to use a legal authority, which when many legal experts said was the most vulnerable one. So you're now saying,
no,
he could have used the Higher Education Act.
He did. He did. He
could have done that in the first instance.
But he didn't, and now he tried it again through the Higher Education Act. The idea that it's like it's a conspiracy, he doesn't want to actually cancel it. No, he appealed the case like 4 or 5 times.
Kyle,
and then at the end of it, when the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that, he said, fuck you, I can. And he did the Higher Education Act. That's exactly what we wanted him to do. Then he does it, and people go, oh, that's not good enough. And it's like, that's ridiculous.
There, Kyle, what we wanted him to do was first and foremost, just cancel the student debt.
I expected him to do nothing on student debt. This is the point I'm trying to get across to you, is that I expected nothing from Biden, and he did way more than I expected. Let's be honest about that.
It's not about your expectations. We have different expectations.
Of course I'm going to talk about it through my expectations. I'm me.
But I want to pivot this conversation a little bit, because what we really have is a tactical disagreement. We could quibble about student loan debt. We could quibble about all kinds of aspects of the Biden administration. All of us would like him to do more. There's no doubt about that. But hold on a second. Our political aims are ultimately very similar. But I do think the student loan debt example is instructive, because it shows what has been effective in terms of securing real gains versus what has been ineffective. Jill Stein running in 2016, I don't think she was a spoiler, but the Democratic Party thinks she was a spoiler. They put that out to the public. So in the theory of change, where a third party would force all of this revolutionary change on the Democratic Party, that should have worked. But instead, it served to allow the Democratic Party to basically demonize and dismiss third party efforts, and then they prop up Joe Biden. So that definitely didn't work. However, the fact that Joe Biden had to be on a primary debate stage versus Bernie and Marianne and a whole lot of Elizabeth Warren, a whole lot of other people who were pushing him on student loan debt cancellation, forced him into a position of doing something when he 100% would have done nothing otherwise. And we can see that now because, the fact that they've basically blocked any sort of real democratic process within the Democratic primary has made it possible for him to literally promise nothing for this next term thus far. So you can see how the third party effort was not successful in bringing about whatever revolutionary change people want to see. And the process that Bernie engaged in and that Marianne Williamson is engaging in now was far more effective in actually delivering results. And that's what I'm focused on.
So first of all, you, I think, are both fundamentally dramatically overestimating and overstating and giving way too much credit in that you can make your labor point, the student debt point, absolutely not. Joe Biden promised and coerced people to the polls by saying he was going to cancel at least $10,000 of everybody's student loan debt, and moreover, cancel all student loan debt for graduates of HBCUs.
Coerced.
And he went down to Georgia a state that he not only needed to win for the presidency, but needed to win for the Senate, and where there are 3 of the major HBCUs in the United States of America, made that promise, and people knocked doors and turned people out to the polls on the basis of that promise, which he immediately stopped talking about the second he got elected and reneged upon. He also knew the authority that he had to cancel all student debt. And I know because all of these student debt advocates have been talking about how they were directly liaising with his office and communicating these points, and they chose to ignore them and do a plan that he knew could be obstructed. You can say it's not a conspiracy theory, that's conspiratorial thinking, but it's either a conspiracy or he's an idiot. Those are the options. And I'm not especially comfortable in validating either of those things. Now, you were saying that you were looking through the prism of your own perspective.
No, I was saying I expected nothing from him, like we all expected nothing from him.
Absolutely not. The people that he promised.
I expected nothing from him. I expected nothing of Joe Biden. He was the guy who brought us NAFTA. He's the guy who brought us the Iraq War. He's the guy who wrote the Patriot Act, who wrote the crime bill. I expected nothing of him.
When a presidential candidate makes a promise to people and lies to them in order to get them to go to the polls, I believe it's my job as a member of independent media to make it clear so that people don't fall for those kinds of mistakes going forward. People, if Biden wants to run as I'm a milquetoast incrementalist who's just better than Trump, he can feel free to do that all day and night, and then he would have lived up to the expectations that he set for himself in the context of a primary campaign.
He did run as a milquetoast.
He promised to cancel all student debt for every graduate of an HBCU and $10,000 to $20,000 of student debt for people who earn less than $125,000 a year. Now, that might not matter to you, and I defend you guys against claims that, you don't care about this stuff because, you're out of touch and it doesn't affect you in material. I think that some of those claims get really silly and overly personalized. But Biden made a choice to tell 44 million Americans who have student debt that he was not only going to not fulfill his promise to them, but that in the middle of the debt ceiling argument of a couple of months ago, the one thing that he was going to bargain away to get the debt ceiling passed was ending the student loan moratorium. So now it's not me. I'm not the one in control of whoever votes. He has to make the case to those 44 million Americans who's he's starting their student debt up. That's right. Months
before an election. Is the plan stronger or weaker than what you expected? Because it's way stronger than what I expected.
Way weaker than what I expected.
But I expected nothing from him on student debt. Nothing.
The real question, though, is we all want all of the debt to be canceled.
Duh. Yeah, of course.
What is the most likely path to get us there?
It's not Joe Biden, obviously.
Hold on. But I don't see how Cornel West getting 5% of the vote and unintentionally helping to reelect Trump, that doesn't get us there at all.
Let's get into that. So for
whereas
two things,
if you have a primary contender actually able face-to-face to pressure him, we have seen the way that can potentially work.
Those aren't mutually exclusive. So why is that an argument against Cornel West?
It doesn't have to be exclusive, but do you think that the project of defeating Trump is worthwhile at all? Because I would turn back on you. You asked the question, like, where's the bottom of the lesser evil question? Like, where does that end? I would turn it back on you and say, where does it become not just a lesser evil, but like, actually, this person is significantly better. And I would say that Biden, for my disappointments with him, for all of the things that I talk about plenty, including disappointments on student loan debt, including on the pandemic relief that I talked about, including on the railways, all these things, right? Ukraine. At what point, though, do you acknowledge that this person is a lot better than Donald Trump? And so when you're in this binary choice where let's not pretend like Cornel West is going to be president of the United States, it is worth making the choice in that situation to reelect Joe Biden and get the NLRB and get the antitrust stuff and get what is at hand to be gotten in this moment and live to fight another day.
So for one, Krystal, somebody might say, and people did make this exact argument against Bernie Sanders. Fine, he's on the stage, but I'm not going to vote for him. I'm not going to weaken the person who's ultimately obviously going to be the president of the United States. Why not vote for Biden in the primaries? Why? And you're wrinkling your brow because it's a ridiculous argument. I completely agree. I don't see the argument for Marianne and against Cornel West. They have nothing to do with each other. You can vote for Marianne in a primary. You can be happy that she's on the debate stage, which obviously they aren't allowing, which is material to this argument, I've got to say. Some people you're saying, what is the Green Party going to do? The Democratic Party has demonstrated that it won't host a free and fair and open primary.
Wait, I get that. But how does Cornel West getting 5% of the vote and helping unintentionally to reelect Trump, how does that move us towards our goals?
So two things. One, you said this in the now viral clip, that just framing Cornel West as the spoiler, looking at those polls. In those polls that you referenced, Biden is losing in both of them, with or without Cornel West in the race. Now,
but Cornel West makes it worse.
Cornel West is incremental worse.
I just want to clarify one thing. I'm not blaming people or saying like it's their fault for Trump getting reelected or whatever. But I am saying we would like it if the way the Democratic Party responded to Cornel West would be to cancel all the student loan. But we know that's not reality. So we know that what ought to happen and the reality of what will happen are two very different things.
Let's get to the second point.
Yeah.
You framed the 2016 votes for Jill Stein and the reaction of the Democratic Party subsequently as evidence that a concerted movement effort to withhold one's votes has been proven ineffective. It is obviously the case, Krystal, that there was not a concerted effort in 2016 or any kind of structural movement to withhold one's vote for Hillary Clinton in favor of Jill Stein. It was just a bunch of us angry Bernie bros, a very small number, by the way, because we all know sitting here that more Bernie Sanders voters in 2016 bent the knee and voted for Hillary Clinton than Hillary Clinton voters in 2008 bent the knee and voted for Barack Obama. We all know these statistics. We've been saying them back at neoliberals for the last 5, 6, whatever years. That being said, there was no argument to control the media narrative and present an opportunity for actual leverage and change. So there wasn't like a group, there was no spokesperson, there was no politician, there was no left media that was saying, here, I have a organized movement, an organized group of people who are willing to actually change their mind and vote for the Democratic nominee in exchange for various concessions. That didn't exist. And I'm, by the way, not advocating for it. I know that some of my friends like Nathan Robinson have said that Cornel West should do exactly that, say that he'd be willing to drop out in exchange for various concessions. I think that's better than nothing. I think that's more than, frankly, I love Marianne and I hope she's successful, but that's more than Marianne is likely to get out of this. However, that is not even my plan, my perspective.
Yeah.
What I am saying, though, is that knowing that the Democratic Party is fundamentally not willing to be fair. They're willing to rig the election. They're willing to change the order of the states. They are willing to completely block Marianne out of the media. It feels rich to say that running within the Democratic Party is manifestly and demonstrably more effective in actually changing the outcomes
because of the structural barriers free
than Cornel West, who at very least, you keep being very dismissive, Kyle, about this 5% matching funds.
First of all, I've said like 2 words in the past 10 minutes, okay? So I'm not being dismissive about anything. I haven't gotten a fucking word in.
Okay. What is it that you're chomping at the bit?
It's the structural barriers against running as a third party, as rigged as it is by the DNC against outsider Democrats, which it definitely is. It's even more rigged against third parties, which is why they always get like 3% of the vote.
Which is literally why
Bernie got 43% of the vote.
Which is literally why people feel it is a structural advantage to get someone like Cornel West to 5% of the vote so they can get federal matching funds. To me, as a voter,
40% as a Democrat.
For me, as a voter in New York, I'm not interested in shoring up the Democratic Party.
No, that's him getting his ideas out. It's shoring up Cornel West. That's the whole point.
I am not a Democrat.
I understand that. That's very clear. But I'm saying that would shore up Cornel West.
And the people who also don't want to vote for Joe Biden under any circumstances are not Democrats. And fundamentally, you can make your argument. I think it's a perfectly legitimate argument to make to Democrats. I think that Democrats might think that Joe Biden is a manifestly better Democrat than other Democrats.
But it's not about whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. It's about what are your political goals. And I think that 100%. We share a lot of the same political goals.
There's a big one that we don't share.
But hold on. So I still don't understand. Just lay out for me.
Yeah.
What in the ideal scenario happens and how does that constitute any sort of revolutionary change or help to further the goals that we largely share?
Yeah. I think for one, getting federal matching funds for third-party candidates, since I believe third parties are going to be a much better vehicle to actual meaningful change in this country than the Democratic Party, is infinitely more significant a goal.
But third parties haven't gotten a single electoral vote in 50
like round
years.
And round and round and round.
No, but it's true because, I mean, look at Ross Perot had all the money in the world. It didn't matter.
He didn't get one electoral vote.
He didn't get one electoral vote.
Do you agree that ranked choice voting needs to come first? That's the important question. Do you agree that if we get ranked choice voting, then yes, overnight third parties become more viable.
But
until we get them, they're not viable.
I think that Cornel West running in a general election where he has been doing this. He's been talking about ranked choice voting in interviews, but continuing to talk about how the onus is on the Democratic Party to prevent the spoiler effect. He is in a position now running in a general election every time he goes on TV to say, if you're upset at me at being a spoiler, you need to look at the Democratic Party who across the country for the last decades has been purposefully undermining any ballot measures that effectively put into effect ranked choice voting in Maine, in North Carolina, the way they attacked Matthew Ho. I am not the enemy, they are. And that's the burden shifting, the narrative burden shifting I think the left should be engaged in right now. To the extent that you think that Cornel West can ruin Biden's chances, isn't it Biden's responsibility to find those votes, not among disaffected third partiers who don't owe him anything anyway, but the tens of thousands and millions of disaffected Democrats who aren't going to vote for him? We've all talked about this together. In Wisconsin in 2016, there were 88,000 registered Black voters who voted in 2012 who declined to vote in 2016. That's like 2 or 3 times the margin by which Hillary Clinton lost in that state alone. And yet we're sitting here talking about whether or not Cornel West is going to pull some third-party voters away from the Democratic Party.
It's the difference between what I would love to happen and the reality that we have experienced now. I mean, we tried it before in 2016. It did not help.
What did we try in 2016?
The third-party effort. Jill Stein was not a spoiler. It is not those voters' fault who voted for you, like you guys that voted for Jill Stein.
But she got blamed anyway.
But she got blamed.
And then the left was further marginalized as a result of it.
So I don't see the connection. If I did, I would love to vote for Cornel West. It would feel way better to vote for Cornel West. I share his politics almost 100%. But I don't see the connection between voting for Cornel West and achieving any of the aims. And I see a much more direct connection between protecting the Biden National Labor Relations Board and allowing this little budding, exciting, amazing, potentially transformational labor movement to actually grow. Whereas if Trump gets reelected, which is, listen, it's the fact, based on how the Democratic Party is going to respond to Cornel West's election bid, it is more likely that Donald Trump gets elected with Cornel West in the race. And that, to me, is a massive loss because we know what his record is. We know what his National Labor Relations Board was. We know who his labor secretaries were and how they were engaged in all this union busting. And so I see a much more direct connection between that moving the ball in our direction than, Cornel West getting 5% and either his candidacy not really mattering at all or being used once again to, smear the left and marginalize the left and say these are just the people that are interested in getting Trump elected.
So
all right. Yeah, you have no idea how hard it's been to wait this long.
There's a lot. There's a lot going on.
It's like every couple minutes there's a point where I would love to stop and talk about it, but I don't want this to be a 6-hour breakdown. So yeah. Victor, you want to start us off?
I mean, there's so many different things. I mean, one of the things that was said a while ago, which I just found amusing, was like Briahna talking about Biden like lying or something, and like that's why, like, she was kind of using that as an argument to be like, oh, he made this promise and he didn't quite keep it in that way. And I guess, and it just struck me as a weird point. It's just like politicians are always gonna like lie. Like, why are you surprised by that? Like, I think because I feel like Kyle was trying to say he was surprised by how much better Biden was.
Yeah.
And then she was kind of trying to retort that by saying it was actually surprising to me that he lied. And I was like, but what's more surprising, a politician lying or Biden doing like more stuff for the left than expected? I don't know. It just.
No, I had the same thought. I mean, like, it seems like, look, there's an obvious sense in which they're both right about this, that like, Briahna is definitely right that there's lots of like good stuff that Biden said he would do that he hasn't done. Totally. Right. And in some cases, he has plausible excuses for not doing it. In some cases, there are either paper thin excuses, like the parliamentarian said we couldn't, when like that's literally a staffer you could just fire, or there's just like, or they've just like quietly dropped the whole subject. So Briahna is clearly right about that, but that's also a different question from like what Kyle was pushing, which was, yeah, but has he been better than you expected? And it sounded like Briahna was saying, no, he's not better than I expected.
Yeah.
It's like, well, hold on, though. I know your expectations were in the sewer because, like, I listened to you talk about him.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I thought. I was like, what expectations did you have for him? Like it just, honestly, it felt like she was just straight up lying. Like she was kind of bad faith, pushed in a corner in the argument, and was just like, I'm going to respond to this by saying, like, he made this promise. And it's like, what planet are you? Like,
yeah, like, is the implication that like she didn't expect him to break promises? Like,
yeah, it was so weird. I was like, what? Like, so you had high expectations for Biden? Okay, what?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, like, oh, well, he told a lie. It's like, yeah, well, we all expected him to tell lies, but like the question is, did he tell less lies than you thought he was going to?
Right. Yeah, if you're asking the expectations question, that's surely the question, right? It's not like, because, and also it's like, yeah, at some point you just have to disambiguate whose expectations. Is it the expectations of like first time voters at, you know, like who like knock doors for Biden, or is it the expectations of like left-wing podcasters? Because again, I know what Briahna's expectations were because she talked about them a lot in 2016. She, as she said, did that whole very visible debate with Noam Chomsky about it. Like we know what her expectations were. She didn't expect anything. I mean, I didn't expect anything. And you know, and like whatever, you're never going to go wrong. You know, you're never going to go broke. Like betting on the left not getting what it wants. So like a lot of what I said is about that was vindicated, but like no, not all of it. Like I actually think, you know, I mean, if we're going to be honest about this, and not just as I think Kyle says at a later point, I saw like a little short snippet of narrative hump. Like that's you know, I mean, I didn't think the withdrawal from Afghanistan was going to happen. Like that's I fully believed that we would still be in Afghanistan at the end of Biden's presidency. Just because like that, by the time that happened, that just felt like that was just etched into the fabric of the universe that, you know, the U.S. was going to be, you know, occupying Afghanistan for the foreseeable future. And I know Trump had done some like early stage negotiation about that, but I think it would have been the easiest thing in the world to back off of that. And again, none of this is to say Joe Biden is great. We should all be happy. Joe Biden is awful in many ways, right? But yeah, I mean, the expectation thing struck me as a little weird for exactly the reason that you said, Victor. And I don't, God, yeah. Okay. So in the part that we just watched, yeah, okay. So the other thing was that when she's talking about an organized movement to get people to withhold their votes, I mean, one, I think it's really telling that's the way she puts it, right? Withholding your vote. Because, you know, if it was, oh, we're going to do this strategy, like the important thing is to build up, you know, the Green Party to the point where it can win elections, and you're just single-mindedly focused on that, then I can respect that. I mean, I don't believe it, but, you know, I can understand the strategy, right? I mean, I just don't really accept, I don't buy the empirical premise that's going to happen that way, right? You know, that like we're just going to somehow go from, you know, I don't know, 1% of the, you know, Jill Stein getting 1% of the vote to Cornel West is going to get 3 or 4, and then 20 elections down the line, you know, there's going to be a Green president. Like, I don't find that especially plausible. I think if we ever did get a viable third party in the U.S., it would probably happen, you know, like through some historical development, like the way that we got a viable third party in the 1850s, right? When the Republicans were a third party, that like one of the existing parties actually collapsed. And so you had like, in that case, like basically the anti-slavery wing of the Whigs, like emerged as this new major party. It didn't start out as this like 2% of the vote protest party. Like it emerged as a major party. And I guess I could just barely imagine something like that happening. But short of that, I'm very skeptical that you can kind of will a viable third party into existence. But I find it really telling that she's not even framing it that way. She's framing it, I mean, some of what she says suggests that, but a lot of it, she's framing it as withholding your votes, that the point isn't really to build up the Green Party. The point is to, like, as a pressure tactic to get Joe Biden and centrist Democrats to like do more of the things that you want them to do. It's like, oh, we'll show them that they can't take our votes for granted. And in a way, it's a weirdly conservative argument because the end state, like the end goal is just is just like lobbying Democrats to be better. So there's something that's very funny about that. But like then Briahna said, oh, well, this an organized movement to withhold our votes. We didn't have that in 2016. We just had some like angry, disenchanted Bernie bros kind of doing this as individuals. It's like, okay, how is that different from what would happen this time? Like in what sense would it be more organized this time? I mean, the Green Party is a form of organization, but that existed in 2016. I mean, sure, is there more independent media? Yeah, but like, is that what we're calling organized movement? That like people like yell about it on YouTube?
Yeah, it is kind of funny. Like you kind of mentioned, like it's kind of framed as though Briahna's position is like the more cynical one, at least towards Democrats. Yeah. But like, it's kind of funny because her argument hinges on like, oh, well, Democrats surely would rather give more to progressives than like lose to Republicans, which is like a pretty generous like assumption, like, I'm not sure if that's true. Especially if Democrats are as like, in the pocket of big businesses and hesitant for substantial progressive change to happen, as I think Briahna Joy Gray would suggest they are in like almost any other context,
Yeah, no, that's very true. Yes.
Jordan, I was just going to say it's
Revive and Tail the Wigs 2020. That's definitely what I'm saying. Yes.
I've noticed there's a really funny debate in the chat too about like your hair too, Ben, but like how you could change it.
That is fair. I'm just gonna pull back the curtain here and give you a tantalizing glimpse of the backstory here. I
would say it's more productive debate than the debate about the debate in the chat. It's interesting to me
in between exercising and getting in the car to go to the studio, basically what I did was put some shoes on and throw on this jacket. So yeah, that is the
well, actually, people were thinking maybe you should follow Kyle Kulinski's and go for a blonde.
Also see somebody says Vosh was against the Afghanistan withdrawal. Okay, well, there we go. I was planning to vote for Vosh for president, but now he has lost my vote.
I just wanted to say quickly though that it's interesting to me because like I feel like this debate, people get really heated about it, and it's just funny how I think we have a tendency to like misrecognize what the debate is actually about. It's like an empirical strategic debate about what we believe is more likely to happen as a result of an action, right? But it's just funny to me how like it seems like people interpret that belief about, oh, this is what I think to happen, and they sort of forget that like most of the people, I mean, definitely the people we're watching, and I would say probably the three of us, all want the same outcome.
Yeah,
right? We want the same outcome, but it's like I notice, well, not just in the chat, but in general, when these kinds of debates come up, it's just funny to me how people kind of hear that as, oh, like you actually like the Democrats, or like you actually want them to win, or like, and it's just, I don't know. I just feel like it's worth raising the fact that that's really not the case at all, right?
Or even when you say like, oh, well, third parties are viable if the voters, decide to make the base. Like, sure, right? But like,
are people going to?
Yeah, I mean but I mean, like the question is like, is it actually going to be the case that you're going to get like, say a third of the American public, so you could just barely win a three-way race to do that, right? I mean, that's not just a question about us and the people in our audiences we're talking to or whatever, right? It's a much bigger question. And I mean, in a way, it's like a little bit like when, I don't know, libertarians say, oh, well, if like every worker quit their jobs and and pooled together into worker co-ops or whatever, right, then like all the stuff you're complaining about wouldn't happen, so really you can't blame anybody else for that. It's like, yeah, you kind of have to start from taking into account some like social reality that is to a great extent defined by other people's predictable decisions about the trade-offs that they're facing, right? And look, I want to be really clear about this because I do see in the chat, like, I think a little bit of confusion on this point. If the question is that who should you blame if like Biden loses in 2024? I think I've been really clear on that. But just to reiterate, I think you should blame Biden, right? I think that it's on him to get people to vote for him, to be a better candidate. It's like that.
Also, fucking retire and get out of the way, Jesus. I mean, I'm not to be ageist, but it's just shocking to me that he's still going to run.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, we talked about this on the main show on Monday, but I mean, it is crazy to go back and look at like the way we think about like the like final years of the Soviet Union, like where we really think of that as a gerontocracy. And it's like, okay. So if I'm remembering all three of these right, there are three Soviet leaders who like in like the final decade or so, right, who died in office as like what we thought of as like extremely old men, Andropov, Chernenko, and Brezhnev, right? And the oldest of those, I think, is Andropov, who was not quite 76. So that is more than a year younger than Donald Trump, more than 4 years younger than Joe Biden is right now. Never mind at the end of the term. It is wild, right? I mean,
it's
like
crazy. It is a geriocracy. What did you call it? A
gerontocracy.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, as a Canadian watching, it's like I'm seeing, all your people in senior positions are just like approaching their 80s or in their late 70s. Like the Mitch McConnell stuff is just out of this world.
Yeah, like he'll forget what he's saying mid-sentence.
It's out of this world. It's like, not that we have great politicians here, but I feel like all the leaders in our parties here are probably in their 40s or early 50s.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And look, maybe there's a case there for the American way of doing this because Justin Trudeau is like much more annoying than Joe Biden.
Oh, he's so fucking annoying. I'm so tired of him. But I don't know. And then I guess just the other thing is like the structural. This also comes, I think, from a Canadian who's like, I'm very familiar with, like, I follow Canadian politics a lot. Like, I'm very familiar with both systems. And I think there's a lot of problems with the parliamentary system, the kind of British style parliamentary system. But I will say, like, when these conversations are happening, these debates are happening about trying to get like radical change, it's like, I mean, I think people do acknowledge it, but it's just so much clearer to me, maybe from the outside, just like how bad the American system is at allowing that. And I just feel like that's such a major structural problem. I mean, you have so many veto points. You've got the Senate, you've got the Supreme Court, you've got all these things. Like, even if Bernie Sanders had won, it's like, yeah, he could do a bunch of executive actions, but like to pass meaningful legislation on healthcare, like, would have been a fucking ridiculous battle. He would have needed. Yeah. I mean, it probably wouldn't have happened. There would have had to have been compromises. And it's like, I will say the one advantage of the parliamentary system in Canada, it's like, if you win, you win, and you have all the power. Like, literally, like the prime minister, he controls the House. He can whip his MPs to vote the way that he wants them to vote. And there's a lot of disadvantages to that. But like, one thing that like publics in parliamentary systems get is they get to actually watch the party that won govern, and you get to watch them pass laws. And then you get to see if you like those laws or not. And it's like, in America, you don't even get to see that happen. It's like, you get to see like weird compromise laws happen once in a blue moon. Otherwise, it's just stalling. It's ridiculous. I don't know. It's ridiculous.
No, yeah. Even if you don't really win in the U.S.
And I guess just like being aware of those institutional barriers, and then just having people argue, oh, we should vote for. It's like voting for a third party is going to make a difference. And I just think about all those barriers, and I'm like, you're on another planet if that's what you think is like going to be the key. I mean, it's just, it sucks, but that's the reality of the American system, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also there's an interesting point that I think I kind of thought Krystal was kind of gesturing at a little bit, which is something that I was actually going to mention last time we paused, but then forgot to mention it. And then something she said kind of jogged my memory a little bit. But like, there's like a good argument, I think, for the kind of pro-Biden side in this debate, which is just like, okay, and, like you mentioned, I think there are some empirical reasons to think that, the accelerationist kind of side is wrong. And that, it's not the case that withholding our votes is going to get the Democrats to pander more to the left. But like, even putting aside, like empirics, like at best, based on the kind of thing that Briahna is saying, like, sure, there's some plausible mechanistic reason to think that it might go the way she's saying. I think there's also plausible mechanistic speculation in the other direction. And so like that kind of cuts both ways. Like we can both come up with plausible stories as to, you know, not voting for Biden or voting for Biden, working out in the left's favor in terms of how much the Democrats go on to pander to them in kind of a longer term sense. But then there's another consideration that doesn't cut both ways, which is just having Biden in office is like much better than having Trump in office, you know, putting aside the kinds of strategic considerations. And that seems like it should at least be like a pretty strong tiebreaker if you're unclear about the strategic case.
Yeah. And it's, yeah, I mean, yes, I do think that, like, and yeah, I mean, I also think it's probably pretty unlikely, and I will say this cuts both ways in this debate, but I do think it's pretty unlikely. I mean, I could be wrong. I'd actually like to be wrong, but like I do think it's pretty unlikely that Cornel West is going to get 5% of the vote. That even Ralph Nader didn't get that in 2000. And I think it's just like, if we're just going to be realistic about this, it's much more likely that he'd get like a couple percent, but then like in a really close election, you know, that like it would be enough to blame the loss on him, then that he would get all the way up to 5%. But I actually think one of the strongest point, you know, and so again, I do think that consideration cuts both ways a little bit. Some of what Krystal was saying, or that clip of Krystal that they were talking about, right? Like I think was talking about polls that probably really overstate how well he's going to do. Cause this is, I mean, if you like literally remember even one previous election cycle, this always happens, that the third party, like when it's like a year out, like the third party candidate is always like polling like way better than they end up doing. Like that's, I've just never known that not to happen. So it's like, yeah, he probably won't do that well. And that does cut both ways. But I think probably the most powerful point that Krystal and Kyle were making about this was just, look, let's say you got the 5%. They got the federal matching funds. What do you think that would do exactly? Like Ross Perot was a billionaire and, you know, self-financing his campaign, and he literally didn't get like he didn't win a single state, right?
And he did win, I think, what, like 30% or something, or 25% one election?
Yeah, he did. I mean, he got a really high percentage of the vote. Let's see, 1992.
92 or 80, 92?
No, so the first time he ran was 92, and he also ran in 96. Yeah, okay, so 92, he got, yeah, it was almost 19% of the votes. It's like giant, right? I mean, it's a, you know, but yeah, he still didn't win any states. And, you know, let's see, he got
9% after that.
9% after that.
Or
okay,
8.5, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was honestly, just as a stylistic tick, I always hate watching people look shit up on screen, but I have in this particular case, I was too curious not to do that at the moment. But yeah, look, I think so like Ross Perot was like way more successful than anybody thinks, you know, Cornel West could be, you know, and yeah, I mean, still didn't like, so it's like, yeah, I have a really hard time seeing how like, oh, well, they'll get more money, therefore, right, that's going to like really change the dynamics of this.
Exactly.
It's
exactly. You're still coming up against the same barriers. It's just,
yeah. And like, yeah, and I don't know. I think Kyle's point that, you know, people always talk about, oh, how rigged primaries are against challengers, and they're not wrong. I mean, like they're kind of wrong. I think oftentimes they'll overstate the case and like sort of say that like if Obama called up Pete and got him to drop out, that counts as a form of rigging. I think that's a little silly, but like they're not wrong that there are many ways in which the deck is stacked against challengers in the primaries. That's absolutely true. But I think where that argument feels very incomplete to me is you're only halfway there. If this is supposed to be an argument for like a third party strategy, what you need to do is then ask, you know, how much is the deck stacked against third party candidates? in the general, right? You have to compare the
way
two.
more, way more,
way more.
Way more.
It would still be way more stacked against them if they got those federal matching funds. I mean, it's like there are lots of countries with much better campaign finance laws than the U.S. has, where it's still the case that you have these like marginal parties, you know, like there are like small socialist parties or whatever that like, yeah, I mean, they'll do better than like the American Green Party, but like they'll get like, you know, they'll get like 4% of the, you know, like in France, you know, like they'll like they're like these you know, small, like the Lutte and whatever, right? You know, there are these like small lefty parties that, you know, put together, they'll get like, you know, 2 or 3 of them will get 5% of the vote put together. So it's like just this idea that that's going to be the silver bullet, I think is just really misguided.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it always seems to me like, you know, when I saw Cornel West was going to be running as an observer, I was kind of hoping that he would try to run as a Democrat. I don't know. Like, I feel like unfortunately,
I wrote an article for Jacobin saying he should do that.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I feel like really like when you think about it and you kind of look at it soberly, look at the structural barriers, soberly look at, you know, like where things have had the best chance of radically changing. And I feel like Bernie Sanders, like winning the Democratic primary, like I feel like taking over the Democratic Party is a much more likely strategy to lead to meaningful change than the third party path for all the reasons you just said.
Yeah, I mean, I should really be honest about this. I'm also pretty pessimistic about that.
So am I, but it's more chance, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Bernie Sanders almost did it, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think like if taking over the Democratic Party means that you get the presidential nomination, then I think Bernie came shockingly close to doing that. I mean, I should
take
also,
more than that, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's also. I mean, I don't know. It's complicated, right? Did Jeremy Corbyn take over the Labor Party? You know, like there's a whole. But like, look, I think, you know, I think right now the left's in a really, really bad position, and we should be honest about that. And you know, I think that to the extent that people are interested in electoral politics, I think like most of the focus should be on like much more local stuff, because I think that's where you have
people in the chat have been saying that, and I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, greater
possibilities for left breakthroughs, and you know, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess my sort of, you know, I mean, if somebody's like asking for like my advice about this for some reason, like what I would say is like, yeah, do, you know, out of all the things that I want you to do, right? You know, it's like, it's, you know, unionize your workplace, work on city council elections, you know, go to Capitol study groups. Then like, yeah, take 2 seconds to, you know, to vote for the candidate, you know, in like the shitty choices that our ridiculous half Democratic Party leaves you. That's like going to do less damage to the workers movement, you know, when they're in power, right? I mean, but that'd be what I would say about that, right? So like I think you know, that's, but again, like all of these things, like all of these sort of big national level strategies right now are like incredible long shots, because the overall situation is really bad, and like something would have to change. And whatever, the good news is that stuff does change, right? But like I think that the hard pill to swallow is that it's like the sort of socialist left as it exists right now, which is extremely marginal. Like there's just nothing you can really do to like will it into changing, right? Like you kind of like, there's stuff you can do to be in a better position for if it does change, like, yeah, do what you can to build up organized labor and all that stuff. But it's, you know, you have to, you know, history doesn't really, you know, have any obligation to like conform to what would make us happy. So anyway, on that note, do you want to, I guess we've still got a little over half of it left. So do you want to watch like a little bit more of it before we go to the post game for patrons?
Sure. Whatever you think is right.
Yep. Now let's do, yeah, we are a little past where we usually do that.
We started late too.
We also started late. So yeah, let's do that.
So to that second point, I'm just going to be honest. Not only do I not care about arguments that the left is going to be smeared. I think it's silly because no matter what we do, the left is going to get smeared. Bernie won Nevada, and it was, oh my God, we're going to decapitate people in Central Park. You know, it is, I think, deeply unrealistic to expect that there's ever going to be a left movement that genuinely challenges power in this country that's not going to be smeared. And if you are choosing your political strategy on the basis of what's going to get you a pat on the head from MSNBC, I know that's not what I don't mean to mischaracterize you, but that is
But I'm
naive.
Listen, that's fine. And I agree with you. Left is going to be smeared. But the question is, what is actually going to move the ball forward?
I'm confused by why
and
you
I just don't,
Matt.
Because I don't see.
Because policy is all that matters at the end of the day.
I don't see how Cornel West getting 5% and helping to reelect Trump ends up with things going in a better direction.
Like that, Krystal. He gets 5%, and then the Green Party, a third party effort, it gets stronger and more well-funded and more able to compete in future elections.
Until we have ranked choice voting, there is no even 1% viability for them. Can you admit that? Can you acknowledge that it's until we get ranked choice voting, no third party has any chance in hell. You agree with that, right?
Has been doing most of the ranked choice. Who do you think?
I'm not going to answer it. It's a simple question.
I'm going to answer it in my own time, in my own words, Kyle, respectfully.
It's a simple one. The ranked choice voting thing, if we get ranked choice voting.
I go around, I do a lot of podcasts, and I don't know what's going on right now. It might be the phase of the moon. We had the double moon last month. But I'm getting a little frustrated with feeling shouted down and disrespected in every single space that I go into. I got to say, I promise I'm going to answer your question, Kyle. Sit tight. I got it coming for you.
I'll sit tight.
Who do you think has been doing the bulk and the best funded ranked choice voting advocacy in terms of getting it on ballots and getting it passed in the United States of America?
Third party voters.
The Libertarian Party.
Yeah.
Because unlike the Green Party, I'm no fan of the Libertarian Party, but for obvious reasons, they were enormously better funded than the Green Party. And they, as a consequence, have been able to make much greater gains and actually getting ranked choice voting passed around the country. What I'm saying is that there's a tangible material benefit to getting more money for a Green Party, whatever third party happens to be. But right now, all we have is the Green Party for obvious reasons. Getting them more money to do the work across the country to advance third parties, ranked choice voting rather, is exactly the goal that you're articulating. So yes, I do see a direct connection between your goal, your stated goal of getting ranked choice voting and voting for the Green Party. You know who's not going to fight for ranked choice voting? The Democratic Party.
Here's my point. There's not even a 1% chance or a 0.1% chance of Cornel West winning unless or until we get ranked choice voting. So I have to be honest, I feel like it's self-disenfranchisement to really put all your effort into third parties before we get ranked choice, putting the cart before the horse, in my opinion. That's my point. And on the issue of Democrats versus Republicans, we know either the Democrat or the Republican is going to win. And clearly we have a disagreement in terms of how good of a job Joe Biden is doing. Because like I said, I expected nothing of him, Briahna. I expected, this is the guy who brought us the Iraq War and the Patriot Act and NAFTA, and he's like the poster child of the conservative Democrat and the neoliberal. But then he gets in office and he does all these things which shock me. He massively reduced the drone war by over 90%. He, like I said, pulled out of Afghanistan. The Supreme Court overturned the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. And the Democrats slipped into the IRA a provision that redefines carbon as a pollutant, which then allows the EPA to start protecting the environment again. If we didn't get that, and yes, that was brought to us by Democrats, we would be beyond fucked on the issue of climate change. We still are, but we'd be even more fucked if the EPA couldn't do basic EPA stuff. We have project labor agreements for hundreds of thousands of construction workers. That came to us from Biden. $15 minimum wage for federal contractors and employees. That's from Biden. Gun reform with red flag laws and closing the boyfriend loophole. Those are definitely good things. Ketanji Brown Jackson on the court. A George Floyd executive order to create a registry of abusive cops. We have the PACT Act, which is healthcare for veterans exposed to toxic burn pits, which every single Republican voted against. He added 800,000 manufacturing jobs. I didn't expect any of these things. So when I talk about Biden the way I do, is because none of these things were on the menu and we got them. So now when I look at the fact it's either going to be Trump or Biden, a standard generic Republican or standard generic Democrat, the way I feel now versus the way I felt in the past is like, oh, this is definitely way better. If you asked me in 2019 or 2020, I'd be like, I don't know, man, flip a coin. 52% maybe a Democrat's a little bit better than a Republican. Now I'm looking at it like, it's not even close. One blows the other out of the water. And all I care about is the policy. And when we have all these policies, I mean, we have a 15% corporate minimum tax rate now. That is not something we had previously. You'd have corporation is paying nothing in taxes, or they'd even get a negative tax rate, which is a subsidy effectively from the taxpayers. These things are not nothing. We have a 1% tax on stock buybacks. They're cracking down on wealthy tax cheats. Like, all these things are very good. They're objectively good. So do you agree that Biden is better than what we expected on the left?
Maybe you've already set your expectations on the ground, and it seems like he's surpassed your expectations. He has not surpassed mine. I don't know what you want me to say.
But he's not
that.
better than what you thought?
No,
That's honest
he's not
question.
better than what I thought he
Really?
would. No.
So you expected to be better than I did, for sure.
I expected him to. Well, I didn't really expect him to fulfill his campaign promises, but I'm not going to pat him on the back when he so flagrantly lied about them. No.
But let me ask you a related but different question. I mean, how do you assess the difference between a Trump and a Biden? Acknowledging that, I mean, I think you would acknowledge it's not, Cornel West is not going to be president.
I'm going to be honest with you. If it's about convincing me how Briahna Joy Gray is going to vote, Briahna Joy Gray lives in D.C., is constructively disenfranchised, and Briahna Joy Gray also is sympathetic to accelerationist arguments. So I am not afraid of Trump, and I will never for the rest of my life, I don't care if I live in Pennsylvania, I don't care if I live in Georgia, vote out of fear. That's not who I am. That's not who I was raised. That's just me. And I recognize that I am radical. I recognize I'm not telling anybody to be like me, but that's who I am.
So, but just to get back to the question, I mean, do you acknowledge that Biden is better than Trump? I genuinely want to know, like, how do you assess? Do you see they're like roughly
I think
the
it depends on what
same?
metric they're using. There are people who will take everything that you just said and say, if Biden escalating in Ukraine the way he has been doing, missiles going off deeper, closer to Russia, that are Western in origin, and the doomsday clock ticking down on World War III the way it has been done, cancels out all of the meaningful gains that you just articulated so nicely. If it comes down to World War III versus that litany of achievements that you just articulated, there were people that, with the hindsight of living in the nuclear holocaust, would say, well, I guess that Trump actually was a better president.
Who's more likely to get us World War III, though? I definitely think it's Trump. I definitely think it's Trump more likely to get us World War III.
I don't want to know what people think.
You disagree?
I want to know what you think. Do you think that that's accurate? Because to me, I look at the record.
We don't know until history happens what history is going to do. I wouldn't have expected that under Biden we would have gotten in the middle of this war with Ukraine and Russia. I would not. That wasn't on my bingo card either.
Yeah, but we know that Trump was actually more hawkish towards Russia than
he built up on NATO's border.
Obama
he put troops on NATO's border.
We know what he did with Iran. We know he said he was going to get on Afghanistan. Biden actually did it. So we can evaluate these two claims. We shouldn't believe anything that Donald Trump says about Ukraine.
A toxic. This is literally just a vote blue no matter who a lesser two evils.
No, it's a let's discuss the facts and how you weigh them conversation.
How about this? Biden can be 10 times better than Trump. Let's concede that for the sake of argument. I'm not voting for him. And millions of other people feel the same way because it has absolutely nothing to do with that. I don't know how else to express this to you guys. Kyle, it's not that there is a disinterest or a failure to recognize what are meaningful changes. But there is a realization that acknowledging gains when the possibility of what someone could be doing to help the population that elected them, when there is a huge gap there, it can be papered up by championing someone's accomplishments. And people are reluctant to give credit precisely because they think it will end the conversation about how much further people should be pushed. So it feels akin to saying, Jeff Bezos was walking down the street and he gave a $5 to a homeless person.
It's not that. Oh my God.
Don't you want to pat him on the back? And it's like, well, yeah, on some level, I'm glad the homeless guy can give his sandwich. But your framing of the student debt issue
is accurate. Yes.
Is precisely what the problem is.
It's not a problem. Look, I am actually discussing the facts that I learned through reading 1,000 articles on the case. Now, if I bring up those facts and it triggers some idiots into hating me, so be it. They can hate me all they want. The facts still matter.
What are you talking about?
Okay, I didn't expect him to appeal the cases. He appealed the cases. I didn't expect him to do the Higher Education Act after the Supreme Court slapped it down. He did the Higher Education Act. I didn't expect him to do any of it, and he did it. And this is something that if I said early on, Biden's going to do nothing on student loan debt, everybody on the left would have been like, you're right, he's going to do nothing. Now he does 5, 6 different things on it. And it's like people go, no, doesn't count. I'm not saying what he's doing is perfect. Obviously, the best thing to do is to wipe it all out through executive order. And he has the authority to do that. That'd be the best thing to do. He didn't do that. But can we at least acknowledge the facts of what went down? And I see this rugged insistent. Honestly, it's like Biden derangement syndrome among some people on the left. And it's like Democrat derangement syndrome among some people on the left. The fact that we can't all agree very quickly that, well, obviously Democrats are not 10 times better than Republicans. They're 100 times better than Republicans. And even if you are somebody who's a purist and you're on the left, you can acknowledge a W in the instances you get it while still pushing for more. I mean, a perfect example is what's happening in Minnesota right now. Minnesota has a 1-seat Democrat majority. We got universal free school meals, legal weed, carbon-free electricity by 2040, tax rebates for the working class up to $1,300 if you make under $150,000 a year, 12 weeks paid family leave, 12 weeks paid sick leave. They banned conversion therapy. They did red flag laws for guns. They did universal background checks for guns. They did automatic voter registration, public free college if you make under 80K, a ban on PFAs, which is the forever chemicals, $2.2 billion increase in K-12 school funding, sectoral bargaining for nursing home workers. These things are all not little wins. They are huge wins. And I still see this insistence like we're back in 2016 or something where people are like, nope, Democrats and Republicans are either equally bad or actually jujitsu move, Republicans are the lesser evil. And I think it's idiotic. It's doomerist. It's nihilist. It's people who are refusing to acknowledge reality, and they'd rather narrative hump all day talking about Democrats are so bad, Democrats are so bad, Democrats are so bad, but oh yeah, I'm a leftist.
Going back to the student debt point, it is.
Oh, she's not happy. All right. There's
so much to talk about, I feel like.
Yeah, you wanna start us off?
Well, I don't know like where to start, but I think okay, so like kind of bringing it back to sort of the tradition of what we're doing here in debate breakdowns, like we tend to comment on the debate tactics, like what are people doing? And I guess I just feel like Krystal and Kyle are kind of sticking to trying to like find some common ground of like what is the empirical reality. And I just feel like Briahna is either kind of talking about what people might think, but like doesn't want to say like what she thinks. And then she's kind of pushed and she'll be like, she said, oh, I'm sympathetic to accelerationism. And I really wish they kind of like stuck on that point. I had the
same thought. It's like, I really wanted everything to grind to a halt there. Be like, whoa,
you just said that?
Right?
But but I will say like, they were really insistent on trying to get an answer from her. And I noticed like some people are like, why do they keep asking her that? But it's because she's not actually answering the question of like what her view is, right? She's talking about like, oh, it's understandable that people will maybe, but what do you think? Like, this is a debate where they're supposed to be talking about what they believe. Yeah. Also, I just thought it was interesting, like the point when she kind of got a little bit triggered there. Like, I think that my impression of the first time I watched it is kind of the same. Like, it was surprising. Like, it was heated. It's a heated debate, right? Like, I didn't feel like Kyle Kulinski was doing anything like overtly rude. Like, maybe someone needs to, educate me on some kind of like, I don't know, microaggression that I didn't notice there. But well, it just seemed like he was making a point.
I feel like if anything, it's probably like, I don't know, like I feel like if you've watched like Kyle Kulinski frequently, or like, this isn't a dig at Kyle, but like, or like if you've watched the Young Turks, because like, I think Kyle often speaks in like a very similar manner as like Cenk Uygur, but like, like if you watch like those shows a lot, like they just kind of talk like that. You know what I mean? Like they kind of just like raise their voice sometimes when they're like making points, or especially when they're kind of on a roll. Like I didn't like register that as like aggression really at all.
No, I didn't. I mean, again, I'm even like pretty like,
especially from someone who prides themselves on being like the female debate queen. Like I saw her talking about it when she was talking to Vosh, who was being way more rude to her than Kyle Kulinski was.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I even probably like, I think I'm a pretty polite guy. I am. I don't really like all of the sort of like what often feel to me like sort of performatively anti-civility stuff that like takes that you get circulating around the left. I think that it's like, no, I think it's like good not to be an asshole when you're talking to people or whatever, but it's like, so like some of the names that have been mentioned in this conversation are names of people who like actually do really annoy me because of the way that they handle these conversations. But like, Kyle just like, I don't know, man. I mean, I feel like I could be out like just like sitting at the bar like with like some like friend from grad school or something. We were like having an argument, and like I feel like it could get like at least as heated as like anything that just happened there. Like that was fine, right? Like that's just
I mean, he raised his voice. He's heated. They're both heated. Like it's just a normal heated debate. I mean, I guess also compared to some of the debates we've watched on this show, it's like it seems so tame. I don't know.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I think that was maybe I'm jaded now, but I mean that seemed okay. Like and certainly like the sort of degree. I mean, it's funny to watch, right? But like the degree of iciness afterwards.
Oh yeah, it got super awkward. Can I just say one other thing? It's just that I think it also stood out to me again, that thing about expectations for Biden came up again. And she kind of admitted she was lying. Like she kind of got pushed and it's like, okay, well, no, I didn't actually expect. But initially he was like trying to push her. He's like, are you saying you expected more from Biden? And she's like, yes, I did. It's like, and then she was like, well, no, I actually didn't. It's like, okay, so like you were lying. Like, I don't know. You're lying for rhetorical purposes.
Yeah. I mean, this is another thing that like, I think that there's, I mean, not unrelated to, I think it's like, I think the general virtue of not being an asshole doesn't actually stop in these kinds of contexts, like not unrelated to that. I think that, I think a lot of people approach debates in this way that it's like they can never concede any point because like that's like losing, right? If you concede something, and it's like, no, you should just concede stuff when you're like, because it's like it's fine to say like, oh, actually, that's a fair point, but I would still say blah, 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 right?
Exactly.
Like, that is totally okay. Nobody's going to think less of you. You're going to have, like, you're probably going to be more persuasive because you're going to come off as more genuine, because you were willing to do that. It's like, it reminds me of, I watched, there's this other, I'm not gonna be coy about this. I'll just say, there's the Lance for the Surf. So he was on he was on Tim Pool, and they were arguing about abortion. And there's this point where he's like biting the bullet on like abortion at like 9 months or like 8 months and 31 days. And it's like, and yes, I understand, guys, because I know somebody in the chat is going to say, when I say that, it's like, no, that's actually a misrepresentation of his point, whatever, because I've seen his later explanation of what he really means. I understand he said it was very unlikely, but still, right? He was like biting that bullet in this way that it's like, you don't need to do this to defend abortion rights, right? Like, you could just say, okay, obviously that would be ridiculous, but right. And then say all your other stuff, right? Like, that's, you just don't, like this idea that it's like, I don't know. I mean, it almost feels like what people, it's funny, right? Cause it's like Brie doing it, but it's like, it almost feels like, what people would do if they were like listening to too much of like, I don't know, a certain kind of like right-wing self-help advice for young men, it's like, it's like never back down, you got to be alpha all the time, right? It's like, no, just be normal, right? You can, like if somebody makes a good point, you could say, okay, that's a good point. But on the larger question, I still think blah, blah, blah. And that would be totally fine. And that's what she should have done, right? Like she
eventually did kind of do that. She eventually was like, I don't care if Biden was 10 times better than Trump.
I don't know. I feel like that
would be another place to pause and be like, okay, well, hold on. You don't?
yeah. I felt like she was kind of like, I don't know, in response to multiple questions, I don't know if she's answered like any of them. Like, I think Briahna has been like very evasive throughout this conversation. Like even what Victor was just mentioning, like when she was talking about, she did this like weird bait and switch when they're asking her like, okay, like, did Biden do better than you expected him to? And she's like, well, I expected him to, well, I'm not going to give him credit if he lied about some of his campaign promises. And it's like, okay, well, that's just like not an answer. Like he lied about some of his campaign promises is totally compatible with he did better than I thought he was going to,
Yeah, I
Exactly.
mean, Nick in the chat says she's saying it's not the right question, and yeah, I think that's like a fair interpretation. But it's like, I think there's a way to say that would have been a lot more reasonable. That's like, you know what, was better than I expected, but still fundamentally, here's what I think and whatever. And you could like, but like just sort of being that sort of intent on denying it, and then change, and then. Yeah, I mean, the accelerationism, obviously, I mean, that's like I hope they follow up on that before the debate is
Huge
over.
alarm bells. Huge alarm bells go off.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah.
Also, in regards to what Nick said, like, I agree. Like, I think it's totally fair to argue that like a question that someone is asking you is not the right question. At the same time, it's like, unless the question is just like totally like bad faith, like when did you stop beating your wife is like the classic example or something like that. Like insofar as like we're taking Kyle Kulinski and them to be like in good faith and trying to have a debate about substance. Like I think like if I ask somebody a question, I would at least want them to like, okay, here's my answer. Now I'll go on to explain why.
What I think is the more
right
important question is
exactly.
blah, 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 right? That's and that's totally fine, right? Go do do that, right? Yeah, for sure. But yeah, you should also answer the question. And again, it's this, there is this like very weird, but there is something that does feel frankly a little bit evasive about all of the like, well, some people might think blah blah blah, and I can understand that, and it's like, well, sure, but what
do you think?
Yes, what does Briahna Joy Gray think? Right, like let's just talk about that. Let's leave the rest of the people out of it. Right, like they can at some point we can canvass their opinions later, right? But like we'll just talk about what you think, right? And because you're the one who's here, and that'll be more interesting for everybody.
She thought that 2-on-1 was unfair, so she's just bringing in like a bunch of other people to help her in the debate.
Yeah. There's the, they're the non, the invisible lifelines there. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's very, and like also, okay, so I want to be fair here. I do think like the student loan example is actually an example where I'm closer to Brianna's position than Krystal and Kyle's. I think that it's not. I think that waiting that long to do it at all, and then going this sort of route that was like very vulnerable to challenges, and I think it's like. I think that it's pretty. I mean, look, if it ultimately happens, then sure, I don't want to downplay like that. Will definitely help some people, but it is. But I think it is pretty weak sauce, and I think it is fair to ask, like how serious he ever was about that, in the first place, right? So that would be an example. But I guess I also think. It is a little bit weird that there were moments there where it really did feel like Briahna was having, just kind of decided to have the debate that she felt like more comfortable with instead of the debate that she was having. Like the one that really jumped out at me is when, like Krystal and Kyle had just been going through like all of these points about how, the differences between Biden and Trump, and why they thought that, in fact, I think in that moment they'd actually been talking about how Biden was exceeded their expectations and had done good things they didn't expect him to do, which is like, also, I think this is also like all the background. I mean, I guess if this is the only thing you'd ever watched, you'd maybe think that these two people, were more enthusiastic about Biden than they are. I mean, if you watch like, Krystal Ball she like co-anchors this multiple times a week news show that, so she's talking about the news for hours a week. And on that show, I mean, she's like very critical of Biden all the time. Right. But like they've been talking about ways, they had in the context of this debate been talking about ways they thought that Biden's record was better than Briahna was saying, and then she just responded, "Oh, well, is this just a vote blue no matter who argument?" And it's like, well, I mean, it's clearly not, right? I mean, like, that's just not the argument that, like, whatever they might have, you know, like, whatever you think about that, that's not the argument that they were actually making, right? Like, it wasn't like a sort of general vote for any Democrat, no matter how bad they are. Like, it was an argument about this particular Democrat and, you know, what he'd done and how it was different, you know, like, it just really seemed like it was a jarring moment. And, you know, I do sometimes wonder about that when, you know, with Briahna in arguments that, you know, I think those same sort of comm skills that maybe came in handy during the Bernie campaign, that, like, there is sometimes a tendency to, you know, to answer the thing that you have a good answer for, as opposed to answering the thing that's being said. Because it's like, yeah, no, it's not like you want to argue with somebody who's saying, well, it doesn't matter how bad Biden is, just vote blue no matter who, and that just doesn't seem like the argument you're in.
Yeah, might call it a bit of a bad faith interpretation. Of what they're saying.
I think, like, I can think of at least like two other examples where it was like, you know, she just kind of like egregious, like, could have easily gave an answer, then just kind of didn't, where it was like there was like one point where they were like, you know, well, who do you think is better, Biden or Trump? And she's like, well, it really depends on the metric. And it's like, okay, well, sure. But, like, the point is we want you to, like, aggregate the metrics and tell us who's better, all things considered. Like, I think that's pretty clearly the question being asked. And she's like, no, well, you know, maybe on GDP, this person's better, on a different metric.
Yeah.
It's like, but who's better, you know? Like,
oh my God. And the thing about, like, the nuclear war point, like, come on. I mean, that just, I mean, I have, I mean, I was getting flashbacks to the East Lansing High School debate team, which, fun piece of trivia. I was briefly on at the same time as one Nate Silver. Did slightly know that guy back then, but like, and, you know, I don't, you know, I mean, I don't think that was ever particularly my thing. I didn't stick with it for very long, but, like, I remember the way that people would, like, sort of come up with ways to try to connect arguments to then there's going to be a nuclear war as, like, the sort of ultimate, like, you know, like, you know, it's like, oh, okay, well, that just defeats anything, right? So it's like, come on now, like, you gotta, you know, I mean, if you're going to bring that up, you've got to give us an assessment of whether you think that that's more likely to happen under Biden or Trump. Because, like, if not, just don't bring it up in the first place. I mean, what are you doing?
Yeah, and that too, they were like, when they were like, okay, well, who do you think is likely to, I think they asked her, like, who's more likely to get us into a nuclear war? And she's like, well, we're not going to know what's happened until it happens. It's like, can we not predict things, you know? Like, I mean, they asked you to give a probabilistic assessment, you know?
Yeah. If we can't predict how likely something seems, then I don't know how, like, I mean, if the entire argument is about strategy, like, if you can't predict what the likely outcomes of something are, then I don't know how that argument could possibly happen in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, just reminds me of the, like, thing we went over last time where it's like, oh, well, this counterfactual didn't actually occur, so I have no idea how I'm supposed to, like, assess its, you know, its likelihood or its truth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Oh,
let's go to the. Yeah. Okay. Well, think about it. We are going to go to the post game for patrons. We are obviously well past the point where we would normally do that, but we are going to do it now on the subject of we were talking about the respects in which I am or am not a debate bro. So I'll say, for anybody who's watching who is in Southern California, we are not going to be ready to actually start selling tickets or anything for a little while yet. Still trying to nail down some details, but there is this guy, Siaka, Massacoy, who is the vice chair of the Los Angeles County GOP. He is a contributor to PragerU and the Babylon Bee. And looks like we are going to be doing a debate in person, not on YouTube, at the Moroccan Lounge in Los Angeles on October 23rd. So as soon as there is more information available on that, and can actually have like a Ticketmaster link and all that good stuff, we'll do that. But looking forward to that. Just wanted to take the opportunity to announce that. But on that note, we are going to go to the post game for patrons, where we are going to watch the last 25 minutes of this. So for that not to be a 2-hour post game, gonna have to be heroically self-disciplined about the speed of pausing it. But
you're pretty disciplined this time, I think. For all the opportunities and the meat to dig our teeth into, you did pretty well.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. So we'll watch the remaining 25 minutes of the post game. I don't know, we'll settle the debate about whether I should imitate Kyle Kulinski's hairstyle, so all of the important stuff is going to happen there. If you're a patron, you should already have a link. If you are not, there's no time like the present, patreon.com/Ben Burgis. Get the patron exclusive post games every Monday and Thursday nights, Discord server, early access to some things, exclusive access to some things, and our undying love and gratitude for keeping it going. So I will see you guys there. Left is best.